Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Ridgway, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Tennessee mountains could throw at me. Bears, wild boars, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened in Moonshine Hollow last spring. I specialize in cultural resources and historical preservation, which means I spend a lot of time dealing with old sites and forgotten places scattered through the forest. It's work I love because these mountains are in my blood. My family's been here since before Tennessee was even a state. We were among the first settlers to push into these hills, and we stayed through everything. The Civil War, the Great Depression, even Prohibition. That last part is important to this story. See, during the 1920s, my great-uncles Ezekiel, Moses, and Caleb Ridgway ran one of the biggest moonshine operations in East Tennessee. They had a still hidden deep in a hollow that doesn't appear on any modern maps, a place so remote that even experienced hikers get turned around trying to find it. The locals called it Moonshine Hollow, and for good reason. The operation ended badly in 1929. Federal agents raided the hollow during a thunderstorm, and all three of my great-uncles died in the gunfight that followed. My grandmother used to tell stories about that night, how you could hear the shooting echo through the mountains for hours. How the agents found bodies but never found all the silver dollars the brothers had hidden in the caves. She said Ezekiel cursed those federal men with his dying breath, swearing that any government agent who ever set foot in that hollow again would pay in blood. I always figured those were just mountain stories, the kind of tales that grow taller with each telling. Vengeful spirits and family curses. That was superstition, not something a rational man with a college degree and 19 years of forest service needed to worry about. That was before May of 1975. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was cataloging Cherokee pottery shards from a site near Tellico Plains. Special Agent Frank Morrison from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was on the line, and he sounded excited. "Ranger Ridgway, we need your expertise. We've discovered a moonshine operation in your sector, but it's in a location that's not on our maps. The informant says it's in something called Moonshine Hollow. You familiar with that area?" My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "Did you say Moonshine Hollow?" "That's right. Supposed to be a big operation. Multiple stills, maybe 1,000 gallons of white lightning ready to move. Problem is, we can't find the access trail. The informant was too scared to guide us in, kept talking about family ghosts and old curses. You know how these mountain folk can be about their superstitions." I knew exactly how mountain folk could be, because I was one of them. And I knew Moonshine Hollow because I'd been there exactly once when I was 12 years old, and my grandfather decided I was old enough to hear the real family history. He'd taken me to the ruins of the old still, shown me the bullet holes in the trees, the rusty remnants of copper tubing scattered through the undergrowth. "I can find it," I told Morrison. "When do you want to go in?" "Tomorrow morning, first light. We've got a team of 6 agents flying in from Atlanta. This needs to be handled quietly. No local law enforcement, no publicity. Just a clean sweep to shut down the operation and arrest whoever's running it." After I hung up, I sat staring at the pottery shards on my desk, my mind racing. Someone was running shine out of the old family hollow. Part of me was curious to see who had the guts, or the ignorance, to set up shop in a place with that kind of history. But another part, the part that still remembered my grandmother's stories and the chill I'd felt standing among those ruins as a boy, was already dreading tomorrow's hike. I spent the afternoon pulling out old survey maps and planning the route. The trail to Moonshine Hollow isn't marked on any official Forest Service maps because it was deliberately hidden. The path winds through some of the roughest terrain in the Cherokee National Forest, following deer tracks and old logging roads that peter out after a few hundred yards. It's the kind of place you can only find if you know exactly where you're going, or if someone in your family showed you the way. That evening I called my cousin Bobby, who still lives in the family homestead about 10 miles from the forest boundary. "Bobby, You heard anything about someone running shine in the old hollow? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sam, you know better than to ask me questions like that over the phone. This is official business, Bobby. The feds are going in tomorrow, and I'm guiding them. I just want to know what we're walking into. Another pause. I heard rumors. Distant cousins from over in North Carolina, maybe. Boys who don't know the first thing about family history. They think that Hollow's just another patch of woods with a good water source. They don't know about Ezekiel and the others? Hell, Sam, half our own family don't remember that story anymore. These boys probably never heard the name Ridgeway in connection with that place. But mark my words, if they're really running shine where Uncle Ezekiel died, they're going to learn about family history real quick. I hung up feeling even more uneasy than before. As I got ready for bed, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's stories, about Ezekiel's curse, and the thunder that supposedly still echoes through the hollow on stormy nights. Superstition, I told myself. Mountain folklore passed down through generations of people who lived hard lives and needed explanations for things they couldn't understand. But as I drifted off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard thunder in the distance, even though the weather forecast called for clear skies. The federal agents met me at the ranger station before sunrise. 6 men in tactical gear, loaded down with enough firepower to fight a small war. Agent Morrison was a thin, serious man in his 40s with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time in offices than outdoors. He introduced me to the team leader, Agent Collins, a burly, ex-military type who looked like he could bench press a pickup truck. Ranger Ridgeway, Collins said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. We appreciate your cooperation. How long to reach this hollow? About 3 hours if we move steady, I replied. It's rough country, and the trail isn't maintained. You sure you want to go in heavy like this? Collins gestured to his team's equipment. We don't know how many subjects we're dealing with or how well armed they are. These mountain moonshiners can be unpredictable. I almost told him about the unpredictable things that had happened in that hollow 46 years ago, but decided against it. These men were professionals, and they wouldn't appreciate warnings based on family ghost stories. We set out as the first light filtered through the canopy. I led them up the main fire road for the first mile, then turned onto what looked like nothing more than a game trail winding through dense rhododendron thickets. The agents followed in single file, their equipment rattling softly with each step. The morning was unusually quiet. In 19 years of walking these woods, I'd never experienced such complete silence. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no buzz of insects. Even the wind seemed to have died away, leaving only the sound of our boots on the forest floor and the occasional crack of a branch. Agent Morrison, who was directly behind me, noticed it too. Seems awfully quiet out here, Ridgeway. Animals probably smell something they don't like, said, though the silence was making me nervous. Or maybe they sensed the storm coming. Morrison looked up at the clear blue sky visible through the trees. What storm? Weather Service said sunny and clear all week. I didn't have a good answer for that because I could smell rain in the air, the rich electric scent that comes before a thunderstorm. But the sky above us was cloudless, and there was no wind to bring in weather from elsewhere. We'd been hiking for about an hour when Agent Patterson, the youngest member of the team, called out from the rear of the column. Hold up! Something's wrong with my radio. We stopped while he fiddled with his equipment. The radio was emitting a low, steady static that sounded almost like whispering voices. Patterson adjusted the frequency, but the static persisted. Probably atmospheric interference, Collins said. These mountains can play hell with radio signals. But as we stood there, I noticed that all of their radios were making the same sound. The whispered static seemed to be coming from all directions at once, creating an echo effect that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Let's keep moving, I said. We're still 2 hours out. The trail grew steeper and more treacherous as we climbed higher into the mountains. Ancient oaks and hickories gave way to thick stands of pine and hemlock that blocked out most of the morning sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, and our breath began to mist in the suddenly cold air. Hell of a climate change for 100 yards of elevation, Agent Thompson muttered, pulling his jacket tighter. That's when we heard the first gunshot. It came from somewhere ahead of us, a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding ridges. Collins immediately raised his fist, signaling for the team to halt and take cover. The agents dropped behind trees and rocks, weapons drawn, scanning the foe. Rest ahead. We waited in tense silence for several minutes, but no more shots followed. The echo seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, bouncing between the hills until it finally faded to nothing. "Could be our subjects," Collins whispered. "Maybe they heard us coming." I was about to agree when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The shot we'd heard was wrong. Not the sharp report of a modern rifle, but the deeper boom of an old black powder weapon. The kind of gun that would have been used in 1929. "Agent Collins," I said quietly, "that wasn't a modern weapon." He looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" Before I could explain, Patterson's voice crackled over the radio from his position about 50 yards behind us. "Jesus Christ, there's something moving in the trees." We turned to look back down the trail, but Patterson was hidden by the thick undergrowth. His voice came again, higher pitched and shaky. It looks like a man, but he's not. He's not solid. He's just standing there watching me." Collins keyed his radio. "Patterson, what's your exact position?" Static answered him, the same whispered static that had plagued our radios all morning. But now it was louder, more insistent, and underneath it I could swear I heard actual words. "Get out of my hollow." Agent Morrison grabbed my arm. "Ridgway, what kind of game are you playing here?" "This isn't a game," I said, and I meant it. The forest around us had taken on an otherworldly quality. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be, and the silence was so complete it felt like we were walking through a graveyard. "We need to keep moving." But as we prepared to continue up the trail, Agent Thompson called out from behind a large boulder, "Collins, you need to see this." We gathered around him as he pointed to the ground. There, pressed dirt, up into the muddy earth, was a line of footprints. They were clearly human, made by old-fashioned work boots, but they didn't follow the trail. Instead, they seemed to come from nowhere, cross the path at right angles, and disappear into the trees on the other side. "Could be one of the moonshiners," Collins suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. I knelt down to examine the prints more closely. They were fresh, so fresh that water was still seeping into the impressions from the muddy ground. But that was impossible, because we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail, and these prints crossed our path at a spot we'd walked past just minutes earlier. "Sir," Agent Baker said from his position about 20 yards ahead, "there's something else you need to see." He was pointing to a tree beside the trail, a massive white oak that had to be over a century old. Carved deep into the bark, as if done with a knife, were the words, "Ridgway Hollow. Keep out." The letters looked fresh, the wood inside still white and sticky with sap, but the carving style was old-fashioned, the kind of lettering you'd see on a gravestone from the 1920s. Agent Morrison turned to me with suspicion in his eyes. "Your family name's Ridgway. You want to explain this?" I stared at the carving, my heart hammering in my chest. "I've never been on this part of the trail before. I don't know who carved this or when." But even as I said it, I was lying. Because I recognized the handwriting. I'd seen it before on old family documents in my grandmother's cedar chest, letters and land deeds signed in that same distinctive style. It was Ezekiel Ridgway's hand. Collins checked his watch and looked around at his increasingly nervous team. "How much farther to this hollow?" "Maybe an hour," I said, though my instincts were screaming at me to turn around and lead these men back to safety. "We push on," Collins decided, "but everyone stays alert. Something's not right here." As we resumed our hike, the temperature continued to drop. Frost began forming on the leaves around us, even though it was mid-May, and the temperature at the ranger station had been nearly 70 degrees when we started. Our breath came in thick white clouds, and the agent's equipment began malfunctioning one by one. Flashlights dimmed despite fresh batteries. Compasses spun wildly without settling on any direction. And through it all, the whispered static on their radios grew louder and more distinct. By the time we reached the final ridge before Moonshine Hollow, we could all hear the words clearly. No. Government. Men. In. My hollow. The voice was deep, gravelly, and filled with a rage that seemed to seep into our bones. It was the voice of a man who had died angry and stayed that way for 46 years. It was the voice of my great-uncle Ezekiel. The descent into Moonshine Hollow was like walking into another world. As we crested the ridge and looked down into the hidden valley, the modern world seemed to fall away behind us. The hollow was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visit. A natural bowl carved into the mountainside, surrounded by steep ridges covered in old-growth forest. A clear stream wound through the bottom, fed by several natural springs that bubbled up from underground. But now there were signs of recent activity. Smoke drifted up from several locations, and I could see the gleam of copper tubing snaking between the trees. Someone had indeed rebuilt the moonshine operation, and from the looks of it, they were doing serious business. There, Agent Collins pointed to a collection of crude buildings near the stream. That's got to be the main operation. Through my binoculars, I could see at least 3 large stills and what looked like a warehouse building for storing the finished product. Several men were moving around the site, tending to fires and checking equipment. From this distance, they looked like any other illegal distillers, mountain men, making a living the only way they knew how. But as we watched, one of the men suddenly stopped what he was doing and looked directly up at our position on the ridge. Even though we were over half a mile away and well concealed in the tree line, he seemed to see us clearly. He turned and shouted something to his companions, and they all began running toward the buildings. "Damn it," Collins muttered. "They've made us. We go in fast and hard. Ridgway, what's the best approach?" I studied the terrain below us, mapping out a route in my mind. There's an old logging road that curves around the western side. We can use it to get within 100 yards without being seen. But even as I said it, I was thinking about something else. The man who had spotted us. There was something familiar about the way he moved, the set of his shoulders. It reminded me of someone, though I couldn't place who. We began our descent using a combination of deer paths and old logging cuts. The temperature continued to drop as we went lower, which made no sense geographically. Valleys are usually warmer than ridges, but Moonshine Hollow felt like it was trapped in permanent winter. Agent Patterson, who had been jumpy since his radio encounter earlier, suddenly grabbed my arm. "Ridgway, look at that tree." He was pointing to an ancient chestnut oak about 50 feet to our right. Hanging from one of its lower branches was a noose, an old one made from hemp rope that had gone gray with age and weather. But despite its apparent age, the rope looked strong enough to bear weight. "Probably left over from the old days," I said, but my voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. These mountains saw a lot of violence during the Moonshine Wars. Agent Morrison examined the rope more closely. "This isn't old, Ridgway. This rope was hung recently. Look at the branch. It's still green where the rope rubbed against it." He was right. The branch showed fresh scars from the rope's movement, and there were footprints in the soft earth beneath the tree. But the prints were the same old-fashioned boot marks. RKS we'd been seeing all morning, the ones that seemed to appear and disappear without explanation. As we continued down into the hollow, we began encountering more evidence of recent supernatural activity. Trees had been stripped of bark in spiral patterns, the exposed wood carved with symbols that looked Cherokee but weren't quite right. Stone cairns appeared along the trail, small stacks of rocks that hadn't been there moments before when we'd passed the same spots. And everywhere the temperature continued to drop. By the time we reached the bottom of the hollow, ice was forming on the stream edges, and our breath hung in the air like fog. "This is impossible," Agent Thompson whispered. "It's got to be 60 degrees warmer at the top of the ridge." But Agent Collins wasn't interested in impossible weather. He was focused on the moonshine operation ahead of us. Through the trees, we could see the distillers moving frantically around their equipment, loading jars into wooden crates and hauling them toward what looked like a cave entrance. "They're destroying evidence," Collins said. "We move now." He signaled for his team to spread out in a standard assault formation. But as the agents began to move toward their positions, the forest around us exploded into chaos. It started with gunfire, not from the moonshiners ahead of us, but from the woods on all sides. The sharp crack of rifles and the deeper boom of shotguns echoed off the surrounding ridges, creating a rolling thunder of weapons fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The agents immediately took cover, scanning the tree line for muzzle flashes. But there were no flashes, no powder smoke, no indication of where the shots were coming from. The gunfire was all around us, yet we could see no shooters. "Contact front!" Agent Baker yelled, pointing toward the moonshine operation. But the distillers weren't sus, hooting at us. They were running in terror, dropping their loads and sprinting toward the cave entrance. Some of them were screaming, and their screams weren't directed at us. They were looking up at the ridge lines, at something we couldn't see. That's when Agent Patterson started shooting. "There!" he shouted, firing his rifle at a stand of pine trees about 100 yards to our right. "I can see them! They're everywhere!" The other agents turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows and the morning mist that had suddenly rolled into the hollow despite the clear sky above. "Patterson, cease fire!" Collins ordered. "What are you shooting at?" "The men in gray. They're coming down from the ridge." Patterson kept firing until his magazine was empty, then fumbled for a fresh one with shaking hands. "Don't you see them? Confederate uniforms, old rifles. They're everywhere." I grabbed Patterson's arm before he could reload. His eyes were wild, unfocused, like he was seeing something that existed 46 years in the past. "There's nobody there," I told him firmly. "You're seeing things that aren't real." But even as I said it, I began to hear what Patterson was hearing, the sound of marching feet, the jingle of equipment, the ghostly commands of officers long dead. The hollow was filling with the sounds of a battle that had ended decades ago. Agent Morrison suddenly doubled over, clutching his stomach. "Something's wrong," he gasped. "I feel like I've been shot." He pulled up his shirt, and we all stared in shock. There was no wound, no blood, but his skin showed a dark bruise spreading across his abdomen in the exact shape of a bullet hole. "That's impossible," Collins said, but his voice lacked conviction. Morrison collapsed to his knees, his face pale and sweaty. "I can feel it," he whispered. "I can feel the bullet moving around inside me." Agent Thompson backed away from Morrison in terror. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." But it was happening, and it was getting worse. The phantom gunfire grew louder and intense, and the agents began reacting as if they were taking casualties. Agent Baker suddenly cried out and grabbed his shoulder, his hand coming away red despite the fact that there was no visible wound. Agent Collins stumbled backward, his leg apparently hit by an invisible projectile. Only Patterson and I seemed to be unaffected by whatever force was attacking the others. Patterson because he was lost in his own hallucination, and me because I was a Ridgway. As the realization hit me, I heard a voice calling my name from across the hollow. A voice I recognized from childhood stories, deep and rough with the accent of old mountain people. "Samuel! Samuel Ridgway!" I turned toward the sound and saw him, a tall, gaunt man in overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, standing beside one of the ruined stills from the 1929 operation. His clothes were faded and patched, and there were dark stains across his chest that could only be blood. Ezekiel Ridgway, my great-uncle, dead for 46 years, standing in his hollow and calling my name. "You brought them here," he said, and his voice carried clearly across the distance despite the chaos around us. "You brought government men into my hollow." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was full of dust. Ezekiel began walking toward us, and with each step he took, the supernatural assault on the federal agents intensified. Morrison was now writhing on the ground, his hands pressed against wounds that existed only in the spirit realm. Collins was trying to apply pressure to a bleeding leg that showed no sign of injury. "I didn't know," I finally managed to say. "I didn't know you were still here." Ezekiel stopped about 20 feet away from us. Up close, I could see the family resemblance clearly. The same sharp cheekbones and deep-set eyes that looked back at me from the mirror every morning. "Still here?" he laughed. "Ged," but there was no humor in it. "Boy, I've been waiting 46 years for more government men to come into my hollow. I told them when they killed me that any federal agent who set foot here would pay in blood. Did you think I was just talking?" Behind Ezekiel, I could see other figures emerging from the woods, Moses and Caleb, His brothers who had died beside him in 1929. They carried old rifles and wore the same blood-stained clothes they had died in. The modern moonshiners had disappeared into their cave, leaving us alone with the ghosts of my family and a team of federal agents who were being systematically destroyed by supernatural forces they couldn't understand or fight. "Stop this," I pleaded with Ezekiel. "These men are just doing their jobs." "Their job is to destroy our way of life," Ezekiel replied. "Same as it was in 1929. Some things never change, Samuel. Government men come into the mountains thinking they know better than the people who've lived here for generations. They come with their badges and their guns and their laws written by city folk who never worked a day with their hands." Agent Collins, despite his apparent leg wound, managed to draw his sidearm and point it at Ezekiel. "Federal agents, you're all under arrest." Ezekiel looked at the gun and smiled. Collins pulled the trigger. The bullet passed right through my great-uncle as if he were made of smoke, but the sound of the gunshot seemed to enrage him. His eyes blazed with cold fire, and he raised one translucent hand toward Collins. The agent screamed and fell backward, his body convulsing as if he were being electrocuted. His weapon flew from his hand and disappeared into the underbrush. "Uncle Ezekiel," I said desperately, "please, let them go. They don't know the history of this place. They're not the same men who killed you." "Government men are government men," Ezekiel replied. "They all carry the same stink of authority and oppression. They all deserve the same fate." Around us, the surviving agents were being picked off one by invisible forces. Some were struck by phantom bullets. Others seemed to be strangled by unseen hands. Agent Patterson had stopped shooting and was now curled up in a ball, whimpering about Confederate ghosts. I realized that I was watching my colleagues die, and there was only one way to stop it. I had to make a choice between family and duty, the same choice that had torn apart these mountains for generations. The moment of decision arrived like a physical blow to my chest. Around me, 5 federal agents were being systematically killed by the vengeful spirits of my own family, while the modern moonshiners they'd come to arrest cowered in a cave, probably praying to whatever god they believed in that the ghosts would finish us off before turning their attention to the illegal distillery. Agent Morrison lay still now, his eyes staring sightlessly at the gray sky above. Agent Baker was trying to crawl toward the trees, leaving a trail of blood that existed in some realm between the living and the dead. Collins was still alive, but barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. Only Patterson and Thompson remained fully functional, and Patterson was lost in his own supernatural nightmare, firing an empty weapon at enemies that had died in 1929. "Uncle Ezekiel," I said, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "I need to understand something." The ghost of my great-uncle turned his attention to me, and I felt the full weight of his rage. It was like standing in front of a blast furnace, but instead of heat, waves of pure hatred washed over me. "What's to understand, boy? These are federal men, same as the ones who murdered me and my brothers. They came into our hollow with badges and guns, thinking their authority meant something here. Well, authority don't mean nothing to a dead man." "But they're not the same men," I insisted. "The agents who killed you in 1929 are DEE themselves by now. These are just men doing their jobs, trying to enforce laws that most people agree with." Ezekiel's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "Laws made by politicians who never set foot in these mountains. Laws that say we can't make corn liquor on our own land with our own corn, can't live the way our grandfathers lived. You think anything's changed since 1929, Samuel? Government's still government, no matter what year it is." I looked around the hollow, seeing it through his eyes for the first time. This place had been in our family for over a century. Generations of Ridgways had lived here, worked here, died here. During Prohibition, making moonshine hadn't just been about money. It had been about preserving a way of life that went back to the Scottish and Irish immigrants who first settled these mountains. But I also saw it through my own eyes, shaped by 19 years as a federal employee and a lifetime of education that my great-uncles never had. The laws against illegal distilling existed for good reasons. Untaxed liquor meant lost revenue for schools and roads and public services. Unregulated distilling meant dangerous products that could blind or kill consumers. I understand why you're angry, I said carefully. But killing these men won't bring back 1929. It won't change the laws or bring you and Moses and Caleb back to life. It'll just create more death, more anger, more reasons for the government to send more men into these mountains. Ezekiel considered this, his ghostly form flickering like a candle in the wind. Behind him, the spirits of my other great-uncles waited for his decision. "You're one of us, Samuel," he said finally. "Ridgway blood runs in your veins. You should be helping us protect the hollow, not guiding government men to our door." "I am helping," I replied. "But not the way you think." I pulled out my service radio and tried to raise the ranger station. Static filled the channel, the same whispered static that had been plaguing the federal agents all morning. But underneath the supernatural interference, I could hear the distant voice of my supervisor. "Base, this is Ridgway," I said into the radio. "I need you to send a message to the ATF office in Atlanta. Tell them Agent Collins' team has encountered an extremely dangerous situation in Sector 7. They need to pull back and reassess their approach." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, boy?" "I'm trying to save everyone," I said. "These federal agents, the modern moonshiners hiding in that cave, and maybe even you and your brothers." I turned to address the spirits of all three men. "You've been guarding this hollow for 46 years, punishing anyone who tries to continue the old business. But the men hiding in that cave, they're family too. Distant cousins who came here not knowing the history, not knowing about your curse." From the cave entrance I could hear voices, young men calling out in fear and confusion. The modern moonshiners were trapped between supernatural vengeance and federal law enforcement, just like their predecessors had been in 1929. "Cousin Bobby told me they're North Carolina boys," I continued. "Ridgways who never heard the family stories, never knew this hollow was sacred ground. They came here looking for good water and remote location, same as any moonshiner would. They didn't mean to disturb your rest." Ezekiel looked toward the cave, his expression thoughtful. "Ridgways? Third or fourth cousins, probably. Great-grandsons of men who left these mountains during the Depression, looking for work in the cities. Their families forgot the old stories, forgot the connection to this place." I could see the conflict in my great-uncle's ghostly face. Family loyalty ran deep in mountain culture, deeper even than the desire for revenge against the federal government. Agent Thompson, who had been quietly trying to help his wounded colleagues, suddenly stood up and pointed his rifle at me. "Ridgway, what the hell is going on here? Are you working with these moonshiners?" "Put the gun down, Thompson," I said without taking my eyes off Ezekiel. "You can't shoot a ghost, and shooting me won't solve anything." "I can see them now," Thompson said, his voice shaking. "I can see the dead men. How is that possible?" "Because you're in their place," I replied. "This hollow exists in more than one time. Past and present are mixed up here, and the dead have as much claim to it as the living." I turned back to Ezekiel. "Uncle, I'll make you a deal. Let these federal agents live, and I'll make sure the government boys understand that this hollow is off limits. I'll use my position with the Forest Service to have it designated as a historical site, protected from development and interference. And the shiners hiding in the cave? That's family business," I said. "I'll talk to them, explain the history, help them understand why this place is sacred. They can set up shop somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't have ghosts standing guard." Ezekiel looked at his brothers, some form of silent communication passing between them. The phantom gunfire that had been echoing through the hollow gradually faded away, and the supernatural cold began to lift. "You give me your word, Samuel, as a Ridgway?" "I give you my word." The ghost of my great-uncle nodded slowly. "Then we got a deal. But if more government men come here looking to interfere with family business, the curse still stands. Next time, there might not be any negotiating." Around us, the wounded federal agents began to recover. Their phantom injuries faded away like bad dreams, leaving them shaken but alive. Agent Collins sat up, looking around in confusion. "What happened? I remember being shot. You were, I said, but not by anyone living. I walked toward the cave entrance, calling out to the men hiding inside. This is Ranger Sam Ridgway. I'm family. Come out so we can talk. After a few minutes, 3 young men emerged from the cave. They were indeed Ridgways. I could see the family resemblance immediately. The oldest, probably in his late 20s, stepped forward cautiously. You're really our cousin? That's right. And we need to have a serious conversation about the history of this place. As I explained to them about the 1929 raid and the family curse, I watched understanding dawn in their faces. They hadn't known they were building their stills on a graveyard. They thought they'd just found a good remote location with clean water and easy access to transportation routes. Agent Collins, still weak from his supernatural experience, listened to everything with growing amazement. Are you telling me we were attacked by ghosts? I'm telling you this hollow is protected by forces that don't recognize federal authority, I replied. And it's going to... My name is Robert Caldwell, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger for 22 years now, working the Jefferson National Forest in Virginia. Most folks think it's a quiet job, just hiking trails and helping lost campers. They're wrong. I'm 48 years old and my body shows every year of it. Lost my right leg below the knee in Vietnam back in '71. The fake leg works fine, but it clicks when I walk. 22 years ago, that clicking saved my life on Screaming Ridge. Let me tell you how. Screaming Ridge got its name from a Civil War battle fought there in 1863. Confederate soldiers made their last stand on that rocky outcrop, 3,800 feet above sea level. Local stories say you can still hear their screams when the wind hits the rocks just right. I always figured it was just wind through the caves. The ridge sits 25 miles from the nearest town. No cell phone towers reach up there. When you're on Screaming Ridge, you're truly alone. The forest there is old, massive oak and pine trees that were saplings when those soldiers died. Rocky outcrops jut up like broken teeth. Hidden cave systems tunnel through the mountain. The whole place acts like a natural sound chamber. A whisper can echo for miles. I have a PhD in wildlife biology, which makes me the go-to guy when something strange shows up in the forest. In 22 years, I'd seen bears, mountain lions, even a few wolves that wandered down from Canada. I thought I'd seen everything. That changed on August 15, 1983. The call came in at 6 a.m. from Colonel Henderson at Fort Bragg. Military units were running training exercises on federal land near Screaming Ridge. Standard stuff, night maneuvers, survival training. Nothing that should have caused problems. Ranger Caldwell, the colonel said, his voice tight. We have a situation. I poured coffee and waited. Military guys always made things sound bigger than they were. Our boys reported being stalked by an unknown large primate during last night's exercise. Sergeant Mills is a 20-year veteran. He doesn't spook easy. Says this thing was 9 feet tall, walking on 2 legs and smart enough to stay just outside their night vision range. I nearly choked on my coffee. Colonel, we don't have primates that large in Virginia. Biggest thing up there is black bear, and they don't walk upright for more than a few seconds. That's why I'm calling you, Ranger. My men found footprints. 20 inches long, 5 toes. Definitely not a bear. 20 inches. That made my skin crawl. A big man's boot is maybe 12 inches. This was something else entirely. I'll head up there this morning, I said. Where exactly were your boys when this happened? Grid reference 347.891, about 2 miles south of the ridge proper. There's a natural clearing there. My men were using it as a staging area. I knew that clearing. It was one of my favorite spots. Peaceful, surrounded by old-growth forest. If something was lurking there, it had picked the perfect hunting ground. After hanging up, I gathered my gear. Camera, measuring tape, plaster for casting prints. My service pistol, a .45 that had never been fired outside the range. I strapped on my hiking pack and headed for my truck. The drive up to Screaming Ridge takes 2 hours on winding mountain roads. I'd made this trip thousands of times, but that morning felt different. The forest seemed too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the insects had gone silent. I parked at the trailhead and checked my equipment one more time. The .45 felt heavier than usual on my hip. I'd carried weapons in Vietnam, but this was different. In the war, you knew who the enemy was. Here, I was walking blind into something I didn't understand. The trail to the clearing is steep, but well maintained. My artificial leg clicked with each step, a rhythmic metallic tap that echoed through the trees. Usually I hated that sound. It reminded me of what I'd lost in the war. That day, it would prove to be the most important sound of my life. As I climbed higher, the temperature dropped. Even in August, Screaming Ridge stays cool. The thick canopy blocks most sunlight, creating a permanent twilight on the forest floor. Moss grows on everything. The air smells of pine needles and damp earth. I reached the clearing around 10 a.m. The military had left obvious signs of their presence. Boot prints, cigarette butts, disturbed vegetation where they'd set up equipment. But there was something else. Something that made my ranger instincts scream danger. The normal forest sounds were completely gone. No bird calls, no insect buzz, no wind through the leaves. The only sound was my own breathing and the click of my prosthetic leg. That's when I saw the first footprint. The print was pressed deep into soft mud near a small stream, 20 inches long, just like the colonel said, 5 toes clearly defined. But it wasn't the size that made my hands shake as I set up my camera. It was the depth. I knelt beside the print, ignoring the sharp pain in my artificial leg. The impression was almost 2 inches deep in packed mud that would barely show my own boot print. Whatever made this track weighed at least 800 pounds, maybe more. I took photos from every angle, then mixed plaster for a cast. While it dried, I followed the trail. The prints led from the stream toward the tree line, spaced about 5 feet apart. A human takes steps of maybe 3 feet. This thing had legs like telephone poles. But here's what really scared me. The prints showed it had been watching the soldiers from the forest edge. Multiple impressions in the same spot, different depths, like it had been shifting its weight while observing. This wasn't some dumb animal wandering through. This was something that studied human behavior. I followed the trail for half a mile. The prints led deeper into the folds, rest toward the rocky outcrops below Screaming Ridge proper. As I climbed higher, I noticed broken branches, not snapped randomly, but bent aside in a pattern, like something tall was making its own path through the forest. My radio crackled. "Ranger station to Caldwell. Come in." I keyed the mic. "Caldwell here. Bobby, got another call from Fort Bragg. They want to know if you found anything." I looked at the massive footprint cast drying in my backpack. "Tell them I'm still investigating. Need another day or two." "Copy that. Be careful up there, Bobby. Weather Service is calling for storms tonight." Great. Rain would wash away any remaining tracks. I needed to work fast. I pushed deeper into the forest, following the broken branch trail. The trees grew thicker, older. Some of these oaks were probably here when Civil War soldiers fought and died on this mountain. The thought made me shiver. Around 2 p.m., I found the first real evidence of the creature's intelligence. In a small clearing, maybe 50 feet across, someone, or something, had arranged rocks in a perfect circle. 12 stones, each about the size of a bowling ball, placed exactly the same distance apart. In the center sat a larger rock, flat, like a table. No animal does this. Animals don't arrange rocks in geometric patterns. This showed planning, intelligence, maybe even ritual behavior. I photographed everything, but my hands were shaking so bad the first few shots came out blurred. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focus on the job, but my ranger training was screaming warnings. This wasn't natural animal behavior. I was kneeling to examine the center stone when I heard it. A low rumble, like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound came from the forest around me, echoing off the rocky ridge above. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded to silence. Every hair on my body stood up. That wasn't some teeth thunder. That was a voice. Something big, somewhere in the trees around me, had made a sound that could only be described as speech. Deep, resonant, but definitely vocalization with purpose behind it. I grabbed my radio. "Ranger Station, this is Caldwell. I need backup up here. Send Sheriff Matthews if he's available." Static. Then more static. The radio was dead. Either the batteries had died, which they shouldn't have, or something was interfering with the signal. I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but the forest felt darker somehow. The trees seemed to close in around the clearing. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding something massive. That's when I noticed the smell. It hit me like a punch to the gut, a mix of wet fur, rotting meat, and something else. Something wild and ancient that made my primitive brain want to run screaming down the mountain. The smell of a predator, a big one. I pulled out my .45 and chambered around. The metallic click echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. Whatever was out there would know I was armed now. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. The smell got stronger. Somewhere close, something was moving. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but every instinct screamed that I was being watched. I started backing toward the trail, keeping my pistol ready. My artificial leg clicked with each step. The sound that usually embarrassed me now seemed reassuring. At least I could hear myself move. That's when I realized the significance of my clicking leg. In Vietnam, we'd been trained to move silently. A clicking sound would give away your position to the enemy. But whatever was stalking me hadn't attacked when I was standing still taking photographs. It hadn't moved when I was kneeling at the stone circle. The clicking warned it I was there. It was staying back because it knew I was armed. This thing wasn't just intelligent. It understood weapons. I made it back to the main trail without incident, but I could feel eyes following me all the way down the mountain. Twice, I spun around. With my gun drawn, sure something was right behind me. Both times I saw only empty forest. But as I reached my truck, I found one more piece of evidence that made my blood freeze. Deep claw marks scored the driver's side door. 4 parallel grooves, each as wide as my thumb, carved through the metal like it was butter. The marks were fresh, bright metal showed through the scratched paint. Whatever I'd encountered on Screaming Ridge had followed me to my truck. It had touched my vehicle while I was hiking in the forest. It could have easily destroyed my only way off the mountain. But it didn't. It just left a message. I know you're here. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those claw marks on my truck door. Deep gouges that would have taken incredible strength to make. And the intelligence behind them scared me more than the strength. The creature could have slashed my tires, smashed my windows, disabled the engine. Instead, it left marks I would definitely see, but that wouldn't strand me. It was communicating. The message was clear. I can get to you anytime I want. At dawn, I called Colonel Henderson. I need to know exactly what your men saw up there. I told you, Ranger. Large primate, bipedal, approximately 9 feet tall. Colonel, I need details. What exactly did it do? How did it move? Did it make any sounds? A pause. Sergeant Mills is here. I'll put him on. The voice that came on the line was steady, professional. Ranger Caldwell? This is Mills. 20-year Army veteran. I've seen combat in 3 wars. What I saw on that ridge... He paused. Sir, it was studying us. My stomach clenched. What do you mean? We were running night maneuvers. Standard patrol formation. About 2,200 hours, Johnson spotted movement in the tree line. We all assumed it was a deer. Then it stood up. Stood up how? Like a man, sir. Smooth. Natural. It rose to full height and just watched us. Had to be 9 feet tall, maybe more. Broad shoulders. Long arms. We could see its outline against the stars. I was taking notes frantically. Did it move toward you? No, sir. It stayed at the forest edge. But here's the thing. It followed our patrol. For 2 hours, it paced us through the trees, staying parallel to our route, always at the same distance. When we changed direction, it changed direction. When we stopped, it stopped. That made my skin crawl. Did anyone try to approach it? Rodriguez wanted to investigate. He started toward the tree line. The thing let out this sound. Christ, Ranger, I've heard dying men scream, but this was different, lower, more powerful, like a foghorn made of rage. Rodriguez stopped dead in his tracks. Then what happened? It melted back into the forest, just vanished. But we found tracks the next morning, big ones. After hanging up, I sat in my office, staring at the plaster cast I'd made. 20 inches long, clearly defined toe impressions. Heel strike showing it walked upright with a human-like gait, but the size was impossible. I called Dr. Sarah Chen at Virginia Tech, an expert on regional wildlife. After describing what I'd found, she was quiet for a long moment. Bobby, there's no known primate in North America that matches your description. The largest reported Bigfoot sightings come from the Pacific Northwest, and even those are considered unreliable by the scientific community. Sarah, I have physical evidence. Footprints, claw marks, witness testimony from trained soldiers. I'm not doubting what you found. I'm saying it doesn't fit any known species. If this thing exists, it's something new to science. Something new to science. That should have excited me, a career-making discovery. Instead, it terrified me. Unknown meant unpredictable. Unknown meant dangerous. I drove back up Screaming Ridge that afternoon, this time carrying a shotgun loaded with deer slugs. The .45 had felt inadequate after seeing those claw marks. If I was going to face this thing, I would anted stopping power. The forest was still too quiet. No birds, no insects, no small animal sounds. It was like the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. I hiked back to the stone circle, hoping daylight would make it seem less ominous. The rocks had been rearranged. Where yesterday there had been 12 stones in a perfect circle, now there were 13. The extra stone sat directly opposite the entrance to the clearing, like a sentinel watching anyone who approached. My hands shook as I photographed the new arrangement. The creature had returned after I left. It had modified its construction. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was intentional communication. I was studying the new stone when I heard branches breaking in the forest around me. Not the random snap of falling deadwood, rhythmic breaking, like something large moving through dense undergrowth. The sounds came from multiple directions, north, east, south. Whatever was out there was circling me. I raised the shotgun and slowly turned in a complete circle. The breaking sounds stopped. Silence filled the clearing like a held breath. Then I saw it. Just at the edge of the tree line, maybe 60 feet away, a shadow that was too tall, too broad to be natural. It stood motionless among the pine trees, but the outline was wrong. Too big. Too human-shaped for any animal I knew. I blinked, trying to focus. When I looked again, it was gone. But now I could smell that wild, ancient scent. Wet fur and something else. Something that made my primitive brain scream danger. The smell was stronger now, closer. "I know you're there," I called out, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm not here to hurt you." The forest absorbed my words without echo. Then, from somewhere behind me, came a sound that made my blood freeze. Low, rumbling vocalization. Not quite human speech, but definitely communication. The sound had syllables, rhythm, intention behind it. It was trying to talk to me. I spun around, shotgun ready. Nothing. Empty forest. The sound came again, this time from my left. Closer. Could feel the bass notes vibrating in my chest. Whatever was making that sound had vocal cords the size of tree trunks. "What do you want?" I shouted. The response was immediate. A roar that shook leaves from the trees and sent echoes bouncing off the rocky ridge above. But within that roar, I heard something that stopped my heart cold. Pain, loneliness, and something that sounded almost like words. I stood frozen in that clearing, finger on the shotgun trigger, while something massive and intelligent circled me through the trees. It could have attacked at any moment, could have killed me before I could raise my weapon. But it didn't. It was trying to communicate. The realization hit me like lightning. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was someone trapped in a monster's body trying to tell me something important. I lowered the shotgun. "I'm listening." I said quietly. The forest went dead silent. Then, from directly behind me, came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Slow, deep, rhythmic. Something massive was standing less than 10 feet away. I turned around very slowly. Golden eyes met mine from the shadows between two massive pine trees. They were intelligent eyes, sad eyes, human eyes in an impossible face. The creature stepped into the clearing, 9 feet tall, broad shoulders covered in dark, matted fur, long arms that hung nearly to its knees. But the face, God help me, the face was almost human, scarred and weathered with those intelligent golden eyes that held too much pain for any animal. It stood completely still, watching me with the patience of someone who had waited a very long time to be seen. I kept the shotgun lowered but ready. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Strangely, I felt calm. This close, the creature's scent wasn't as overwhelming. Beneath the wild animal musk, I caught something else. Something familiar. Gunpowder. Old leather. The italic smell of blood that never quite washes away. Combat smells. Smells I knew from Vietnam. The creature raised one massive hand, not a claw, a hand with fingers, and pointed at my artificial leg. Then it made that low rumbling sound again, but this time I caught actual words hidden in the deep vocalization. Soul. Dire. My heart nearly stopped. You're trying to say soldier. It nodded. A completely human gesture from something that shouldn't exist. You were a soldier, I said. Another nod. Then it pointed at itself and made more sounds. Deeper, more guttural, but I could make out syllables. Job. Cobb. Hen. Der. Son. Henderson. The same name as the colonel who'd called me. Jacob Henderson. You're related to Colonel Henderson? The creature's eyes filled with something that might have been tears. It nodded again, then turned and started walking toward the rocky outcrops that led up to Screaming Ridge proper. It looked back at me and made a clear gesture. Follow. Every survival instinct told me to run, but those eyes, I'd seen that same look in Vietnam. Men who'd seen too much, carried too much pain, but still had something important to say. I followed. The creature moved through the forest like it owned it. No broken branches now, no disturbed vegetation. It flowed between the trees like water, occasionally looking back to make sure I could keep up with my artificial leg. We climbed toward the ridge for 20 minutes before reaching a cave entrance I'd never seen in 22 years of hiking these mountains. The opening was hidden behind a curtain of vines and fallen rocks. Without the creature's guidance, I would have walked past it 100 times. The creature paused at the entrance and looked at me. Those golden eyes held a question. Do you trust me? I had no logical reason to trust a 9-foot monster, but something in those eyes reminded me of every good soldier I'd ever served with, men who'd die before betraying a fellow warrior. I nodded. The cave was larger inside than the entrance suggested. Natural limestone chambers, connected by narrow passages. The creature moved confidently through the darkness, but I had to use my flashlight to avoid falling into crevices. In the largest chamber, my light revealed something that made me gasp. Civil War artifacts covered every surface. Rifles, ammunition, uniforms, medical supplies. But not scattered randomly, arranged carefully, respectfully, like a museum display or a shrine. The creature gestured toward one wall where a Confederate uniform hung on wooden stakes. The gray wool was faded and moth-eaten, but still intact. Beside it hung a leather pouch containing what looked like personal letters. I approached cautiously. The creature watched as I examined the uniform. On the collar were the chevrons of a sergeant. Embroidered inside the jacket was a name. Jacob Henderson, 33rd Virginia Infantry. Jesus Christ, I whispered. The creature moved to another part of the chamber and picked up something from a natural stone shelf. It brought the object to me, a daguerreotype photograph in a cracked silver frame. The image showed a young man in Confederate gray, maybe 20 years old, with dark hair and a serious expression. But the eyes were golden, just like the creature standing beside me. "Jacob Henderson," I said quietly. "You've been here since the war." He nodded, then made more of those deep, rumbling sounds. This time I heard more words. "Cursed. Spring. Can't. Die." He gestured for me to follow again, deeper into the cave system. We walked for what felt like miles through passages that angled steadily downward. The air grew warmer, humid. I could hear water flowing somewhere ahead. Finally, we emerged into a vast underground cavern. My flashlight beam disappeared into darkness above, but I could hear water dripping from stalactites. In the center of the cavern, a natural spring bubbled up from deep in the earth, the Wattis. Air glowed with a faint phosphorescence that hurt to look at directly. Jacob pointed at the spring and made more sounds. Gradually, I pieced together his story. Wounded in the battle on Screaming Ridge, bleeding to death, he'd crawled into these caves, seeking shelter, found the spring, drank the glowing water to ease his thirst before dying. Instead of dying, he'd transformed, grew larger, stronger, gained the ability to heal from any wound, but lost his human appearance, his human voice, became something that could never return to the world above. For 120 years, he'd been trapped in these mountains, watching over the battlefield where his unit died, protecting it from those who would disturb the dead. "The military exercises," I said. "You were protecting the burial sites." He nodded vigorously, then led me to another chamber. This one contained recent items, military equipment, maps, photographs. He'd been collecting intelligence on the modern soldiers, trying to understand their intentions. But something else was in this chamber: plans, blueprints, official documents with military seals. I picked up one of the documents and felt my blood turn to ice. Proposed development site, Screaming Ridge Military Training Facility, permanent installation. They were going to build a base here, on top of the battlefield, on top of the unmarked graves of Jacob's unit. "They don't know," I said. "The military doesn't know there's a cemetery here." Jacob made sounds of desperate agreement. He pointed at another document, an archaeological survey that had somehow missed the burial site. I understood now. Jacob wasn't a monster terrorizing soldiers. He was a guardian, trying to protect his fallen comrades from desecration, but he couldn't communicate with modern humans. His appearance was too frightening, his voice too changed. "You need my help," I said. "You need someone who can speak for you." He nodded, then did something that broke my heart. The massive creature knelt before me in a position of military respect, like a soldier reporting to a superior officer. Here was a man who'd served his country, paid the ultimate price, and continued serving for over a century, alone, misunderstood, unable to rest until his duty was complete. I knelt beside him, ignoring the pain in my artificial leg. "Sergeant Henderson," I said formally, "I'll help you complete your mission." For the first time since I'd met him, Jacob Henderson smiled. It was a terrible sight on that transformed face, but it was completely human. Getting the military to listen took 3 days and all my credibility as a ranger. Colonel Henderson, Jacob's great-great-great-nephew, as it turned out, finally agreed to meet me at the cave entrance. I didn't bring Jacob out immediately. Instead, I showed the colonel the artifacts in the cave: the uniform with his ancestor's name, the letters home that were never sent, the daguerreotype that showed the family resemblance across 5 generations. "My God," Colonel Henderson whispered, holding a letter written in Jacob's young hand. "We've been looking for him since 1863. He was listed as missing in action." Then I told him about the spring, about the transformation, about 120 years of solitary duty. The colonel listened without interruption, occasionally touching the letter from his ancestor. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're asking me to believe my great-great-great-uncle is still alive, as a 9-foot cryptid. I'm asking you to meet him." Jacob emerged from the deeper caves like a shadow. The colonel's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, then stopped. Even through the shock of seeing something impossible, he recognized the military bearing, the respectful way Jacob approached and waited for permission to speak. "Sergeant Henderson reporting for duty, sir," I said, translating Jacob's rumbling words. Colonel Henderson stared at those golden eyes that matched the daguerreotype exactly. Slowly he straightened and returned the salute. "At ease, Sergeant." What followed was the strangest military briefing in history. Jacob led us through the cave system to where his unit was buried. 23 unmarked graves in a hidden chamber, each marked with personal effects. Men who died fighting for what they believed in, forgotten by history but remembered by one faithful guardian. The colonel used my radio to call off the construction project immediately. Within a week, the military quietly redesignated Screaming Ridge as a protected historical site. The official story mentioned newly discovered Civil War artifacts of significant archaeological importance. Jacob was given what he'd waited 120 years to receive: official recognition of his unit's sacrifice and a promise that their rest would never be disturbed. But he wasn't done serving. The spring that had transformed him was more than just a curse, it was a responsibility. Other creatures had drunk from it over the decades: bears, deer, smaller animals that had become something else. Jacob had been protecting the mountains not just from grave robbers, but from the spread of whatever force dwelled in that glowing water. "You can't leave," I realized during our final conversation in the caves. He shook his massive head. His duty wasn't just to the dead, it was to the living, to make sure the spring's power never escaped these mountains. I visit him regularly now. Officially, I'm conducting ongoing archaeological research on Screaming Ridge. Unofficially, I'm checking on an old soldier who's been alone too long. The military has a new policy about training exercises near protected historical sites. They avoid Screaming Ridge entirely, which suits Jacob fine. He prefers the silence. But sometimes, late at night when storms roll through the mountains, hikers still report hearing screams echoing from the rocky ridge. They're not screams of the dying, though. They're the sounds of a guardian calling roll, making sure his men are still safe in their eternal rest. And in the deepest part of those caves, beside a spring that glows with unnatural light, Sergeant Jacob Henderson continues his watch, not as a monster, but as what he's always been, a soldier who refuses to abandon his post. Some duties don't end with death. Some promises last forever. I learned that on Screaming Ridge from a man who became something impossible rather than break faith with his fallen brothers. My name is Robert Caldwell, and I'm the only person alive who knows the truth about the Screaming Ridge beast. He's not a monster at all. He's the best soldier I've ever known. My name is Bill Hawthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 25 years. I've seen bears attack campers, watched lightning split trees in half, and pulled more lost hikers out of the woods than I can count. But what happened on Copper Ridge that Halloween night changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I work the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, mostly the backcountry areas where cell phones don't work and the nearest road is miles away. At 52, I was just 3 years from retirement, looking forward to fishing and not worrying about tourists who think they can hike 10 miles in flip-flops. Copper Ridge is the highest peak in my area. It's an 8-mile hike to get there, straight up through thick forest that gets darker the higher you climb. The trees grow weird up there, twisted and stunted like something's been keeping them from growing right. Local folks have always said strange things about that ridge. Old stories about witches and devils that I never paid much attention to. The trouble started on October 28th when 3 college kids came stumbling into the ranger station, looking like they'd seen a ghost. They were shaking, covered in scratches, and could barely speak straight. "There's something up there," the girl kept saying. Her name was Sarah, and she had these wide, scared eyes that reminded me of a deer caught in headlights. Something with wings, huge wings. Her boyfriend Jake nodded fast. It was following us. We could hear it in the trees, but when we looked up, all we saw were these red eyes looking down at us. The third kid, Tommy, just sat there rocking back and forth. When I asked him what he saw, he whispered, "It looked like a person, but wrong, all wrong." I wrote up their report, thinking it was probably just an owl. or maybe a big bird that spooked them in the dark. Mountain shadows can play tricks on people, especially city kids who aren't used to how quiet and dark the woods get at night. But then my radio started acting up. Every time I tried to call the main office, all I got was static. My GPS kept spinning, couldn't lock onto any satellites. Even my flashlight would flicker and die, then work fine an hour later. The next morning, I found deep scratches in the bark of an oak tree right outside the station. 4 parallel marks like claws, but they started 20 feet up the trunk. No bear or wildcat could reach that high, and the marks were too big anyway. Each scratch was as long as my hand and cut deep into the wood. That's when Mrs. Henderson from town showed up. She was maybe 80, with white hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her family had lived in these mountains for 6 generations. "You found the marks, didn't you?" she said, not even waiting for me to answer. "Up high in the trees where nothing normal could reach." I nodded, wondering how she knew. "It's waking up," she said, looking toward Copper Ridge. "Every few years when Halloween gets close, people see it. The mountain devil. Most folks think it's just stories, but my grandmother knew better. She saw it once back in 1962. Mrs. Henderson told me about Margaret Thornfield, a woman accused of witchcraft in 1692. They dragged her up to Copper Ridge and burned her alive, right there on the summit where those old stone circles still sit. As she died, she cursed the mountain and the men who killed her. "She called something up from the dark places," Mrs. Henderson said. "Something that's been waiting all these years. It gets stronger every Halloween, and it remembers everything, every injustice, every wrong that was done." I thanked her for the story, but inside I was thinking like a ranger. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a large bird blown off course by the storm systems we'd been having. Maybe the electromagnetic interference was from solar flares. I'd heard about that causing GPS problems. But that night, alone in the station, couldn't stop thinking about those scratch marks, about the way the college kids had looked, about how my equipment kept failing every time I pointed it toward Copper Ridge. I made my decision. Halloween was 2 days away. If there was something dangerous on that mountain, some kind of wild animal or unstable person, I needed to find it before more hikers got hurt. Budget cuts meant I'd be going alone, but I'd done solo patrols hundreds of times. I packed my gear: water, food, first aid kit, emergency radio, backup batteries for everything. My service pistol, though I'd never had to use it on anything bigger than a sick raccoon, rope, flares, and my grandfather's old compass, the only thing that seemed to work properly around here anymore. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to Mrs. Henderson's warning. Should have wondered why she looked so scared when she talked about Halloween night. Should have asked what happened to her grandmother after she saw the mountain devil in 1962. But I was a ranger. It was my job to keep people safe, and I'd never run from anything in my life. I started up the trail to Copper Ridge before dawn on October 30th. The forest felt different that morning, too quiet, like all the birds and small animals had packed up and left. My boots crunched on dead leaves, the only sound for miles. The hike usually takes about 4 hours, but I was taking my time, looking for signs of whatever had spooked those college kids. I found more claw marks on trees as I climbed higher, always up where no normal animal could reach. Some of the marks were fresh, still weeping sap. Around noon, I came across their campsite. The tents were still there, but they'd been shredded like paper. Sleeping bags torn open, stuffing scattered everywhere. Their food was untouched, but their electronics, phones, cameras, GPS devices, were all crushed into pieces. I found a trail cam they'd set up pointing toward the ridge. The memory card was missing, but the camera itself was bent in half like someone had grabbed it and twisted. The metal was still warm to the touch. That's when I noticed the prints. They started at the edge of the campsite and led toward a cliff face about 30 yards away. At first, I thought they were human footprints, bare feet, about size 12. But as I followed them, they got strange. The stride was too long, like whatever made them was taking 10-foot steps. And near the cliff, they just stopped. I looked up. The rock face went straight up for about 60 feet. No way to climb it without ropes and gear. But something had gone up there, because I could see more claw marks in the stone itself. I was photographing the prints when my radio crackled to life. "Base to Ranger Hawthorne. Come in, Bill." I grabbed the radio, surprised it was working. "This is Hawthorne. I'm at the campsite on Copper Ridge. Found some property damage, but no signs of the hikers who reported the incident." "Roger that. Listen, Bill, we're getting reports of more disturbances. Family camping at Bear Creek says they heard screaming last night, coming from your direction." My blood went cold. Bear Creek was only 3 miles from where I stood. What kind of screaming? Not human, according to them. Said it sounded like a person in pain, but wrong somehow. Lasted about 10 minutes, then stopped. I was about to respond when the radio went dead. Just static, then nothing. I tried my cell phone. No signal. My GPS was spinning again, couldn't find any satellites. I decided to push on to the summit. If there was an injured person up there or some kind of dangerous animal, I needed to find it before dark. The last 2 miles to Copper Ridge are the hardest part of the hike. The trail switchbacks up a steep slope covered in loose rocks and thorny bushes. But as I climbed, I started noticing that the plants were dying. Not just the normal autumn browning, they were black and withered, like something had poisoned the soil. I reached the summit just as the sun started to set. Copper Ridge is maybe 50 yards across, mostly flat rock with those old stone circles Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. They're not natural. Someone built them, arranged the stones in perfect rings about 6 feet across. Local archaeologists think they're Native American, but they've never been able to date them properly. In the center of the largest circle, I found what was left of Tommy. I'd seen animal attacks before, but nothing like this. His body was torn apart but not eaten. Whatever killed him had taken its time. The worst part was his face, frozen in a scream, eyes wide with terror. He'd been alive when it started. I was calling it in on my radio when I realized it was working again. But the voice that answered wasn't from my dispatch. "William Hawthorne." It spoke my name like it had been waiting for me. "Who is this? Identify yourself." "You know who I am. You've always known." The voice was wrong. Too deep, with an echo like it was speaking from the bottom of a well. But underneath I could hear something else. A woman's voice, full of pain and anger. "Your family owes a debt, William. A debt that's been growing for 300 years. My grandfather's compass started spinning wildly. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in white puffs and frost began forming on the stones around me. That's when I saw it. It rose from behind the far stone circle like a shadow taking shape. At first it looked like a person standing up, tall, maybe 7 feet. But as it stepped into the dying sunlight, I could see it wasn't human at all. The thing had wings, huge, leathery wings that stretched 15 feet from tip to tip. Its body was thin and twisted, covered in dark fur or maybe feathers. I couldn't tell which. The face was the worst part. It looked almost human, but stretched and wrong, like someone had tried to remake a person from memory and got the details twisted. And its eyes. They glowed red in the growing darkness, and when they looked at me, I felt something cold wrap around my heart. "Margaret Thornfield," I whispered, remembering Mrs. Henderson's story. The thing smiled, showing too many teeth. She called me forth with her dying breath, bound me to this place with her pain and rage, and I have been waiting so long to meet another Hawthorne. It spread its wings and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a roar. The noise echoed off the mountains, and somewhere in the distance I heard other voices answering, howling, crying, voices full of centuries of anger. I ran. I made it maybe 100 yards down the trail before I realized running was exactly what it wanted. The thing, the mountain devil, could have caught me in seconds with those wings. Instead, it was following me through the trees just close enough that I could hear it moving. Playing with me. Every few minutes, it would let out that horrible cry, and the sound would bounce off the mountains like there were a dozen of them surrounding me. I'd catch glimpses of red eyes watching from the darkness, always just at the edge of my flashlight beam. My radio came to life again. This time, it was my own voice speaking. "Help me," I heard myself say. "It's got me trapped on the ridge. Send backup immediately." But I hadn't said those words. I was listening to my own voice calling for help while I stumbled through the dark woods, and I knew that anyone who tried to rescue me would be walking into a trap. I tried to switch to a different channel, but every frequency was broadcasting the same message. My voice, over and over, begging for help that would only bring more people to die. That's when I found Dr. Sarah Chen. She was hanging from a tree about 10 feet off the ground, wrapped in what looked like spider webs, but was too strong to be made by any normal spider. She was still alive, barely, and when she saw my flashlight, she tried to scream but could only make a weak, gasping sound. I climbed up and started cutting her down with my knife. She was one of the college kids who'd reported the sighting, but she wasn't supposed to be here. The three of them had left the mountain after giving their report. "It made us come back," she whispered when I got the webbing away from her mouth. "Called to us in our dreams. Jake and Tommy came first. I tried to stay away, but I couldn't. It was in my head, showing me things." I helped her down from the tree, but she could barely stand. Both her legs were broken, twisted at angles that made my stomach turn. "Where are Jake and Tommy now?" She pointed up the mountain with a shaking hand. "It's collecting us, taking us to the stone circles one by one. Saving you for last because you're special. You're a hawthorn." That's when the voice came again, but this time it was speaking from Sarah's mouth. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and when she spoke, it was in that same deep, echoing tone I'd heard on the radio. "William Hawthorne, descendant of Magistrate William Hawthorne, who condemned an innocent woman to burn. Your ancestor's sin lives in your blood. You will pay for his crimes." Sarah's body went limp. She was still breathing, but when I checked her pulse, it was so weak I could barely feel it. I couldn't carry her down the mountain with two broken legs, not in the dark with that thing hunting us. But I couldn't leave her either. I dragged her to a small cave I remembered from previous patrols, maybe 30 feet deep and narrow enough that I could block the entrance with fallen logs. I got her settled as comfortably as possible and gave her my emergency blanket. She was going into shock, skin cold and clammy. "Listen to me," I told her. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need to understand what we're dealing with. You said it. Called to you in dreams?" She nodded weakly. "It showed me things. The witch burning. Your ancestor was there, William. He was the one who read the sentence. Margaret Thornfield looked right at him as she died and spoke his name. My hands were shaking as I checked my equipment. Everything electronic was dead except for my grandfather's old compass, and even that was spinning like crazy. She cursed your whole family line," Sarah continued. "Every generation it takes one. Your great-great-grandfather disappeared hunting in these mountains in 1895. Your great-grandfather was found dead on Copper Ridge in 1923, torn apart just like Tommy. The curse skipped your grandfather and father, but it was waiting for you." I thought about my family history, things I'd never paid attention to. My grandfather had moved away from Virginia when he was young, said he never wanted to see these mountains again. My father had been the same way, wouldn't even visit when I took the ranger job. "How do you know all this?" It told me, "It knows everything about your family, every birth, every death, every secret. It's been watching and waiting." A sound echoed through the forest. That horrible cry, but closer now, much closer. "You have to go," Sarah whispered. "It won't kill me while you're still free. I'm bait." She was right. I could hear something large moving through the trees outside the cave, circling us. If I stayed, we'd both die. If I left, maybe I could find a way to stop it. I blocked the cave entrance as best I could and headed deeper into the forest. But I wasn't running blindly anymore. I had a destination in mind. The old ranger station on Thornfield Creek, about 3 miles northeast. It was abandoned now, but I knew it had an old radio setup that might work if I could get the generator running. As I picked my way through the dark woods, I started to understand what the mountain devil really was. Not just some demonic creature, but something born from injustice and fed by centuries of rage. Margaret Thornfield had been innocent. I was sure of that now. The witch trials were about fear and politics, not real magic. But her death had been so wrong, so cruel, that it had torn a hole between worlds. And that hole was shaped like my family's guilt. I was maybe a mile from the old station when I saw lights ahead through the trees. Flashlights, moving in an organized search pattern. For a moment, I felt relief. Rescue had arrived. Then I heard the voices calling my name, and I realized they were all using my own voice. 6 or 7 people, all sounding exactly like me, searching the woods and calling for William Hawthorne to come out. Everything was going to be all right. The mountain devil wasn't just mimicking my radio calls anymore. It was creating an entire phantom search party, trying to lure me into the open. I crouched behind a fallen log and watched the fake rescuers move past. In the darkness, they looked almost normal, but something was wrong with the way they moved. Too smooth, like they were floating just above the ground instead of walking. One of them stopped right next to my hiding spot and turned its head in my direction. In the flashlight beam, I could see its face clearly for the first time. It was me. Or rather, it was wearing my face like a mask. But the eyes were wrong. Too bright, and when they caught the light, they reflected red. "I know you're there, William," it said in my voice. "Why don't you come out and meet your family?" That's when I realized what the other searchers were. They all had my face, but they were different ages. A young man who might have been me at 20, an older version with gray hair and lines around the eyes, a boy who couldn't have been more than 16. The mountain devil was showing me every hawthorn it had claimed over the centuries, wearing their faces like trophies. "Your great-great-grandfather put up quite a fight," the young version said, grinning with my mouth. But in the end, he screamed just like all the others. I waited until they moved past, then crept toward the old ranger station. But I knew now that there would be no simple rescue, no calling for backup that could save me. This was about more than just surviving until morning. This was about breaking a curse that had been growing stronger for 300 years. The old ranger station was exactly as I remembered it, a small cabin with a tin roof and a rickety radio tower. I'd played here as a kid when my grandfather was still alive, back before I knew why he'd really left these mountains. The generator was old, but functional. I got it started on the 3rd try, and the ancient radio equipment hummed to life. But when I tried to call for help, all I got was static. Then, slowly, voices began to emerge from the white noise. William Hawthorne. They were calling my name. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds. Men, women, children, all speaking together in a horrible chorus. "We've been waiting so long, William. Waiting for you to come home." I recognized my great-great-grandfather's voice among them, and my great-grandfather's. All the hawthorns who had died on this mountain, their souls trapped by the mountain devil's curse. But there were other voices, too. People I didn't recognize, speaking in old-fashioned accents. "Margaret Thornfield was innocent," one of them said. "We all knew it, but we were afraid. Afraid of what the magistrate would do to us if we spoke the truth." "Your ancestor condemned her to save his own reputation," said another. "She was guilty of nothing but healing the sick and speaking against injustice." The radio crackled, and a new voice emerged. A woman's voice, strong and clear despite the centuries. "William Hawthorne, you carry the blood of the man who murdered me. But you are not him. You have a choice he never gave me." "Margie." "Arette?" I whispered. "The creature that stalks you is born from my pain, but it is not me. It is everything that was done to me, given form and purpose. It feeds on the guilt your family carries, grows stronger with each generation's fear." Through the cabin window, I could see red eyes watching from the tree line. The mountain devil was out there, waiting. "How do I stop it?" I asked. "The same way it was created. With truth, with justice, with someone willing to stand against the crowd and do what's right." The lights in the cabin flickered and died. My grandfather's compass, sitting on the table beside the radio, began to spin frantically. The temperature plummeted, and frost spread across the windows in spiral patterns. The door burst open, and the mountain devil stepped inside. Up close, it was even more terrible than I'd imagined. Its wings scraped against the ceiling, and its claws left deep gouges in the wooden floor. But its face, that was the worst part. It kept shifting, showing me the faces of everyone it had killed. My relatives, the college kids, dozens of others I didn't recognize. "You cannot hide from justice, William Hawthorne," it said, and its voice was like breaking glass. "Your bloodline ends tonight." "You're not justice," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You're just revenge wearing justice's face." The thing laughed, a sound like tearing metal. "Your ancestors said similar words as he watched Margaret burn. Pretty speeches won't save you." It was right. I couldn't fight this thing, couldn't outrun it. But Margaret's words echoed in my mind. Someone willing to stand against the crowd and do what's right. I thought about my great-great-grandfather. My great-grandfather. All the Hawthornes who had died carrying this guilt. They'd all tried to run, tried to fight, tried to deny what their ancestor had done. None of them had ever tried to make it right. "I acknowledge the debt," I said. The mountain devil paused, tilting its head like a bird of prey. "William Hawthorne, magistrate of Salem Village, commit. At a great injustice when he condemned Margaret Thornfield to death. She was innocent of the charges brought against her. She died because of fear, superstition, and political ambition." The creature's eyes blazed brighter. "Pretty words, but words cannot undo 3 centuries of pain." "You're right," I said. "But they're a start. Margaret Thornfield, I formally overturn the verdict against you. You were wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and wrongly executed. In the name of justice, I declare you innocent of all charges." The mountain devil let out a shriek that shattered every piece of glass in the cabin. It lunged toward me, claws extended, but something held it back. Invisible chains that glowed like starlight wrapped around its limbs. "No!" it howled. "She died in agony. She suffered. Justice demands payment." "Justice has been served," I said. "The truth has been spoken. The innocent have been declared innocent. What you want isn't justice, it's vengeance." The chains grew brighter, and the creature's form began to waver. Through the dissolving horror, I could see something else. A woman in simple colonial dress, her face marked by pain but no longer twisted with rage. Margaret Thornfield looked at me with sad, wise eyes. "The debt is paid, William. Your family's guilt dies with this acknowledgement. What about the people it killed, my relatives, the college kids? They will find peace now," she said. "The creature fed on your family's guilt, but that guilt is gone. Without it, the dead can rest." The mountain devil made one last desperate lunge toward me, but its claws passed through my body like smoke. It was fading, becoming less real with every second. "This isn't over," it snarled. "There are other places, other injustices, other families carrying guilt they refuse to acknowledge." Then it was gone, leaving only the smell of sulfur and burnt wood, marred. Garrett Thornfield smiled at me, and for a moment she looked young and alive again. "Thank you, William, for having the courage your ancestor lacked." She faded like morning mist, and I was alone in the ruined cabin. I found Sarah Chen still alive in the cave where I'd left her. The rescue team that arrived at dawn, a real rescue team this time, with normal voices and solid faces, airlifted her to the hospital in Charlottesville. Her legs would heal, and the doctors said she'd walk again, though she'd always have a limp. Jake and Tommy were found at the stone circles on Copper Ridge, but they were different from what I'd seen before. Their bodies were at peace, no longer twisted in terror. The coroner ruled their deaths as animal attacks, and maybe that was true enough. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe it? A 300-year-old witch's curse? A demon born from injustice? A family guilt that fed supernatural revenge? But I did some research afterward, digging through old records and family histories. I found the trial documents from 1692, found my ancestor's signature on Margaret Thornfield's death warrant. I also found something else, a letter he'd written to his brother, admitting that he knew she was innocent but couldn't speak against the hysteria that had gripped the colony. I had that letter published in the local historical journal, along with a formal acknowledgement of the injustice done to Margaret Thornfield. The Virginia General Assembly even passed a resolution posthumously pardoning all the victims of the colonial witch trials. It was a small thing, maybe. Just paperwork and ceremonies. But sometimes small things matter more than we realize. I retired early, couldn't stand to patrol those mountains anymore knowing what I'd seen up there. But I kept my grandfather's compass, and I noticed something interesting about it. It always pointed true north now, no matter where I was or what electromagnetic interference might be around. Some nights, I dream about Margaret Thornfield, not as the twisted creature that hunted me, but as she really was, a healer, a woman who spoke truth to power and paid for it with her life. In the dreams, she's always smiling, and the mountains behind her are clean and bright, but I have other dreams too. Dreams of different mountains, different places where old injustices still fester like infected wounds. Places where other families carry guilt they won't acknowledge, feeding creatures born from centuries of pain. The mountain devil of Copper Ridge is gone, but it was right about one thing. There are other places, other debts waiting to be paid. I get letters sometimes from park rangers in Colorado and Montana, Alaska and Maine. Stories about strange encounters, equipment failures, and things that hunt in the wilderness where cell phones don't work and help is days away. They don't ask directly, but I can read between the lines. They want to know if I've ever seen anything unusual. If I have any advice for dealing with situations that don't fit in the official reports. I always write back the same thing. Research the history of your area. Look for injustices that were never acknowledged, wrongs that were never made right. Sometimes the monsters we face aren't born from evil. They're born from pain that's been ignored for so long it's taken on a life of its own. And sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to have the courage to tell the truth. I keep my grandfather's compass on my desk now, next to a photo of Copper Ridge taken on a clear spring morning. The mountain looks peaceful in the picture, just another Appalachian peak covered in green trees and morning mist. But I know the truth about what's buried in those mountains. Not just the bones of the dead, but the weight of untold stories, unacknowledged suffering, and the guilt that gets passed down from generation to generation until someone finally has the courage to break the cycle. The mountain devil is gone, but America has a long history, and not all of it is written in the history books. Some of it lives in the places where injustice happened, where the innocent suffered and no one spoke for them. And in those places, in the deep wilderness where the modern world hasn't quite reached, old debts are still being collected by things that remember when the rest of us choose to forget. If you're ever hiking alone in the mountains and your equipment starts failing, if you hear voices calling your name in the darkness, if you see eyes watching from places they shouldn't be, remember Margaret Thornfield. Remember that sometimes the only way to banish the darkness is to shine a light on the truth. Even if that truth is 300 years overdue. My name is Joseph Blackwood, but everyone calls me Joe. I've been a park ranger for 17 years now, watching over the old mining country in West Virginia's New River Gorge. Before this job, I spent 12 years digging coal from these same mountains until a cave-in crushed my left leg and ended that life forever. People think being a ranger means sitting in a tower watching for fires, but my beat is different. I handle the dangerous stuff, checking old mines for gas leaks, keeping thrill seekers out of unstable tunnels, making sure nobody gets hurt in places that should have been sealed off decades ago. The coal companies left behind a maze of holes and shafts when they pulled out in the 70s. Most are flooded now, others filled with methane that'll kill you before you know what hit you. January, in these mountains, is brutal. This particular morning, the thermometer outside my cabin read -12, and the weather radio kept squawking about a blizzard rolling in from the northwest. I was checking my gear, hard hat, gas detector, emergency rope, the works, when the phone rang. "Joe, this is Sheriff Martin down in Fayetteville. Got some spelunkers here telling a real strange story about the old Kowalski mine complex. You know that area? I knew it all right. The Kowalski mine had been the biggest operation in the county until 1952, when a section collapse trapped 12 men deep underground. They never recovered the bodies. The tunnels were too unstable, too dangerous. The mining company just sealed it up and walked away. What kind of story, Sheriff? They say they saw something down there. Something pale and fast, moving through the tunnels like it owned the place. A couple of them swear it looked human, but the way it moved... Martin's voice trailed off. Look, I know how it sounds, but these aren't kids or drunks. Professional cavers with 20 years. Experience, they're spooked bad. I promised to check it out, though I figured I'd find nothing more than shadows and overactive imaginations. Cave systems play tricks on your mind, especially deep ones where the darkness is so complete it feels solid. But it was my job to investigate, and with a storm coming, I needed to make sure nobody else went poking around down there. The drive to Kowalski took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads. Snow started falling as I parked near the old mine entrance. Fat flakes that would soon turn this whole area into an impenetrable white maze. The mine opening itself was bigger than most, wide enough for the old coal cars to roll through. Someone had cut the chains on the safety barriers. Fresh cuts, too. I switched on my helmet light and pulled out my gas detector. The readings were good, no methane, no carbon monoxide. But something felt wrong as I stepped into that tunnel mouth. The air was too still, too quiet. Even abandoned mines usually have sounds: water dripping, wood creaking, the mountains settling. This place was silent as a grave. 20 feet inside, I found the first sign that the cavers weren't imagining things. Scratches in the tunnel wall, too high up for a man to make without a ladder. Too deep, too. Whatever made them was strong and had claws. The main tunnel stretched ahead into darkness. My light barely reached 50 feet before the blackness swallowed it completely. Ice crystals covered the support beams, and my breath came out in white puffs. But underneath the cold, I caught something else, a smell like copper pennies and old meat. That's when I found the deer. It was a big buck, 8 points, hung upside down from a support beam like someone was field dressing it. But this wasn't any hunter's work. The animal was completely white, drained of every drop of blood. Its eyes had sunken back into its ski. Hull and the skin was tight as leather across the bones. 2 neat holes punctured its throat, too small for a knife, too precise for an animal bite. I've seen a lot of dead things in these mountains, but nothing like this. The deer looked like it had been hanging there for weeks, but there was no smell of rot, no flies. Just that metallic scent hanging in the cold air. My radio crackled with static when I tried to call it in. Too deep underground already, and I'd only gone a couple 100 yards. The storm would make things worse. I was on my own down here, and something told me I shouldn't be. But I had a job to do, and people were counting on me to keep them safe. So I checked my equipment one more time and started deeper into the mine, following the narrow-gauge rail tracks that disappeared into the darkness ahead. Behind me, snow began to pile up at the tunnel entrance, and the wind started to howl. I had no idea that I was walking into the home of something that had been hungry for almost 30 years. The main tunnel split into 3 branches about a quarter-mile in. I chose the middle path, following scrape marks on the walls that looked fresh. My footsteps echoed strangely in the narrow space, like they were being answered by other footsteps deeper in the mine. That's when I found the bear. It was a black bear, maybe 300 pounds, suspended from the ceiling just like the deer. Completely drained, skin like parchment, those same 2 puncture wounds in its throat. But what made my blood run cold was where they'd hung it, 40 feet inside a side tunnel, in a spot where you'd need climbing gear to reach the ceiling. No human being could have lifted a 300-pound bear up there alone. I played my light over the walls, looking for some explanation. That's when I saw them, handprints in the coal dust, pressed into the tunnel walls 8 feet off the ground. Human handprints, but the fingers were too long, and there were claw marks where the fingernails should be. My gas detector started clicking. Not methane, something else. The air was getting thicker, warmer, like I was walking into something's den. I should have turned back then, But you don't last 17 years in this job by running from the unknown. You figure it out, document it, and make sure it doesn't hurt anybody else. The tunnel curved to the left, then opened into a wider chamber carved out of the rock. This had been a working area once. I could see where the old coal cars had turned around, and there were still pieces of mining equipment scattered along the walls. But someone had been busy in here recently. The walls were covered with animal bones, arranged in strange patterns that hurt to look at. Deer, bear, smaller creatures I couldn't identify. All picked clean, white as fresh snow. And hanging from the ceiling were more bodies. A mountain lion, 2 more deer, something that might have been a wild boar. All drained, all perfectly preserved. But the worst part was the sound. Breathing. Deep, slow, coming from somewhere in the shadows beyond my light. Not quite human, but close enough to make my skin crawl. And underneath that, a wet sound like someone licking their lips. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "This is Park Ranger Blackwood. If someone's in here, you need to identify yourself." The breathing stopped. I swept my light across the chamber, trying to penetrate the darkness. Nothing. But I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. My hand went to my sidearm, a .38 revolver that suddenly felt like a toy. That's when it moved. A flash of pale skin at the edge of my light, gone before I could focus on it. Fast as a striking snake, quiet as smoke. But I'd seen enough to know it was big, and it was definitely human. Or had been once. "I'm not here to hurt you," I called out, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "But you can't be doing this to the animals. People are going to come looking, and they're going to get hurt." A voice answered me from the darkness, low, rough, like someone who hadn't used it in years. "People already hurt. Long time ago. Left us here. To die." The words hit me like a physical blow. Us. There was more than one. "Who are you?" I asked, still backing away. "What happened to you?" "Kowalski Mine, 1952. Section 7 collapse. 12 men trapped." The voice was getting closer, though I still couldn't see anything. "Company sealed us in, left us in the dark, in the cold, in the hunger." My blood turned to ice water. The mine disaster. 12 men trapped and never recovered. But that was almost 30 years ago. Nobody could survive down here for 30 years. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Impossible?" Something that might have been laughter echoed through the chamber. "You think dying is impossible? You think hunger is impossible? You think watching your friends waste away in the dark is impossible?" I reached the tunnel mouth, but behind me I could hear it moving. Not walking, flowing, like it was crawling along the walls and ceiling. Getting closer. "We found a way to live, Ranger Blackwood. Found a way to never be hungry again. The deer come into the tunnels when the snow gets deep. The bears look for caves to winter in. They feed us now. Keep us strong." "Feed you how?" But I already knew the answer. "Blood, Ranger. Sweet, warm blood. Keeps the cold away. Keeps death away. We learned that watching Jimmy Morrison die. Poor boy lasted 6 days after the collapse. We helped him along at the end. And when we drank what he had left," a long pause, "we felt better. Stronger. Warmer." I was running now, stumbling back through the main tunnel, my light bouncing crazily off the walls. Behind me I could hear it following, not hurrying, just keeping pace like a cat playing with a mouse. "Don't run, Ranger. You'll hurt yourself in the dark. And we need you healthy, need you strong. It's been a long winter, and the animals are getting scarce." I reached the main entrance just as the blizzard hit in full force. Snow whipped horizontal across the opening, and the wind howled like something in pain. Behind me, the thing from the mine had stopped following. I could see 2 pale points of light in the darkness, eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. "We'll wait, Ranger Blackwood. Storm's getting bad out there. You'll be back, and when you come back, we'll be ready." I made it to my truck and locked the doors, knowing how stupid that was, but needing to do it anyway. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something pale running after me through the snow. But there was nothing there except darkness and the storm. It wasn't until I got back to my cabin that I realized the truth. Whatever was down in that mine knew my name, had been waiting for me specifically, and it had called itself We. There wasn't just one monster in those tunnels. There were 12 of them. The miners who died in 1952 hadn't died at all. They'd become something else. Something that fed on blood and lived in darkness and waited 3 decades for someone to come close enough to join them. And now they knew exactly where to find me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice talking about hunger and darkness and the sweet taste of blood. By morning, the storm had dumped 2 feet of snow across the mountains, and my truck was buried up to the windows. I tried calling Sheriff Martin, but the phone lines were down. Tried the radio. Nothing but static. The storm had cut me off from the outside world completely, which meant nobody was coming to help, and nobody would miss me if I didn't check in for a few days. That's when I found the first sign they'd been here. Tracks in the snow around my cabin. Human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too long, with claw marks where the toes should be. They rolled the building 3 times before disappearing back into the woods. Next to my bedroom window, the snow was packed down like something had been standing there for hours, watching me sleep. I loaded my .38 and checked every lock twice, but I knew locks wouldn't keep them out if they really wanted in. Whatever those miners had become, they were strong enough to drag a 300-pound bear up a mine shaft. A wooden door wouldn't slow them down for long. The second night was worse. Around midnight, I heard scratching on the roof. Slow, deliberate scratches like claws on wood. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, but there was nothing there except more tracks in the snow. These led from the roof to the woods, and some of the footprints were 30 feet apart. Whatever made them was jumping from tree to tree like a giant squirrel. On the 3rd morning, I found Mrs. Henderson's cat. Mrs. Henderson lived about 2 miles down the mountain, or used to, before the storm. Her little cabin was dark and cold, with no smoke coming from the chimney. The front door was standing open, snow drifting across the kitchen floor, and on the table, arranged like some kind of offering, was Mittens. The cat looked just like the deer and the bear, completely drained, skin tight as leather, those 2 neat puncture wounds in its throat. But what made my stomach turn was the note pinned to its chest, written in something dark and sticky. Getting hungry, Ranger. Storm's making the animals hard to find, but we know where the warm blood is. Mrs. Henderson was nowhere to be found, but I knew where she'd gone. There were drag marks in the snow leading from her cabin toward the old mine complex. Human-sized drag marks with drops of frozen blood dotting the trail like breadcrumbs. I followed the trail as far as I dared, but it led straight back to the Kowalski mine. At the entrance, the snow was stained red, and I could see where something heavy had been pulled into the darkness. Mrs. Henderson's boots were sitting neatly beside the tunnel mouth, still laced up tight. Hats when I knew they were hunting more than animals now. I spent the rest of the day trying to dig my truck out of the snow, but it was hopeless. The storm had been followed by freezing rain, and everything was locked in ice. I was trapped here with them, and they knew it. The 4th night, they got bolder. I was sitting by my fireplace, cleaning my gun for the 10th time, when something tapped on the window. 3 soft taps, like a neighbor asking to come in. I looked up and saw a face pressed against the glass. It had been human once. I could see that much. But the skin was white as paper, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were completely black, like pools of oil, and when it smiled, I saw teeth that were too long and too sharp to belong in a human mouth. "Let us in, Ranger," it whispered, its voice somehow carrying through the glass. "It's cold out here. We just want to get warm." I raised the gun and pointed it at the window. The thing's smile got wider. "Bullets won't stop us, Joe. We've been shot before, crushed under tons of rock, left to die in the dark. We're harder to kill than we used to be." "What do you want?" I managed to ask. We told you. We're hungry. The storm killed most of the deer. The bears are all denned up where we can't reach them. We need fresh blood, Joe. Warm blood. Human blood. You killed Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson was old. Her blood was thin, sour, barely worth the effort. The thing pressed its face closer to the glass. But you're different, Joe. 17 years in these mountains, strong, healthy. Your blood will taste like summer. I pulled the trigger. The bullet shattered the window, but the thing was gone before the glass hit the floor. I heard laughter echoing from the woods, coming from at least 3 different directions. You can't stay awake forever, Joe, one of them called out. And we've got all winter. I boarded up the broken window and sat with my back to the fireplace, gun in my lap. Outside, I could hear them moving around the cabin, testing the walls, looking for weak spots. Sometimes they would scratch on the roof or tap on the remaining windows. Once, something tried the door handle, turning it slowly back and forth. But they didn't try to break in. Not yet. They were playing with me, like cats with a mouse, making me sweat, making me scared. Fear made the blood taste better, they'd probably learned. Fear was seasoning. As dawn broke on the 5th day, I realized the truth. They weren't just hunting me for food. They were recruiting. 12 miners had gone into that hole in 1952. 12 miners had become something else. But 12 wasn't enough for them. They wanted more. They wanted me to join their underground family, to become another pale thing that fed on blood and lived in darkness. And if I didn't find a way to stop them soon, they'd get their wish. The snow was starting to melt, and I could hear water dripping from the roof. The storm was breaking up, which meant help might be coming. But it also meant the creatures would be getting desperate. Tonight, they would stop playing games. Tonight, they would come for me. The attack came just after sunset. I heard them on the roof first, claws scrabbling across the shingles like a pack of giant rats. Then the walls started shaking as they threw themselves against the cabin, testing every board, every nail. My boarded-up windows cracked under the pressure, and I could see pale fingers poking through the gaps. "Time to come out, Joe," one of them called. "Time to come home." I grabbed my emergency backpack and headed for the back door. If I could make it to the woods, maybe I could outrun them until daylight. But when I opened the door, 2 of them were waiting for me. The first one had been a big man in life. Broad shoulders, thick arms, probably a coal loader. But now his skin was white as bone, and his fingernails had grown into black claws. The second was smaller, maybe the mine forcer, man, with intelligent eyes that gleamed like a hungry animal's. "Hello, Joe," the smaller one said. "My name's Luther Kowalski. I owned this mine before the accident, before we became what we are now." I slammed the door and ran for the front of the cabin, but they were already inside, moving impossibly fast, flowing like liquid shadow from room to room. I made it to the living room before strong hands grabbed me from behind. "Easy, Joe," Luther's voice was right beside my ear. "We're not going to hurt you. Much." They dragged me outside and through the snow toward the mine. I fought, but it was like fighting steel cables. They were so strong it was almost funny. I might as well have been a child struggling against adults. "Why me?" I gasped as we reached the tunnel entrance. "Because you understand these mountains," Luther said. "Because you know the old mines, the hidden places. Because you could help us spread beyond this valley. There are thousands of abandoned mines in West Virginia, Joe. Thousands of places where we could make new families." The tunnel was warm after the cold outside air, and I could smell that metallic scent again. Old blood and hunger. They carried me deep into the mine, past the chamber where I'd first heard Luther's voice, into sections I hadn't seen before. This part of the complex had been turned into living quarters. The walls were lined with sleeping alcoves carved from the rock, each one stained dark with something I didn't want to think about. Mining equipment had been arranged into furniture, ore carts for tables, support timbers for chairs. Electric cables ran along the ceiling, powered by an old generator that chugged and wheezed in the darkness. and everywhere, hanging from hooks and chains, were the drained remains of animals. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all white and mummified, all with those same 2 puncture wounds. "Well, come to our home, Joe," Luther said, spreading his arms wide. "Isn't it beautiful? We've been working on it for 30 years, made it perfect for our kind." He gestured toward the sleeping alcoves, and I saw pale faces peering out at me. More miners, all transformed into these blood-drinking things. I counted 11 of them, which meant Luther was the 12th. The complete set. "You're going to love it here," Luther continued. "No more worrying about the weather. No more being alone. You'll have brothers, Joe. Family. And you'll never be hungry again." "I won't become like you," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Oh, but you will." Luther's smile showed those razor teeth. "See, we learned something interesting about the transformation. It works best when the subject is willing, when they choose to become like us. Fighting it just makes the process messy." He nodded to the others, and they started closing in. I saw their eyes gleaming in the generator's dim light, saw their claws extending like switchblades. "But we have ways of making people willing," Luther whispered. That's when I noticed something important. The generator was old, probably from the mine's working days, and it was running on gasoline. I could smell the fumes mixing with the blood stench. These things had been down here so long they'd forgotten some basic facts about mine safety. "You know what I think, Luther?" I said, backing toward the generator. "I think you made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" I pulled out my emergency flare and struck it against the rough tunnel wall. It blazed to life, throwing red light across the chamber and making the creatures hiss and cover their eyes. "Gasoline fumes and open flame don't mix," I said, and threw the flare at the generator. The explosion knocked me flat and filled the tunnel with fire. The creatures screamed, not in anger, but in genuine pain and terror. Whatever they'd become, they were still vulnerable to fire. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the tunnel entrance as the flames spread along the gasoline-soaked floor. Behind me, I could hear them coming, moving fast, but not as fast as before. The fire had hurt them, slowed them down, but it hadn't killed them, and they were angry now. I reached the main tunnel and kept running, following the old rail tracks toward the entrance. My lungs burned from the smoke and the cold air, but I didn't dare stop. I could hear claws on stone behind me, getting closer. The tunnel entrance appeared ahead, a circle of gray light in the darkness. I put on a final burst of speed and burst out into the night air, gasping and stumbling through the melting snow. But Luther was waiting for me. He stood beside my truck, completely calm, not even breathing hard. His white skin was marked with burn scars from the fire, but he was still smiling. "That was clever, Joe," he said. "But fire's just a temporary setback. We've survived worse than that. Much worse." "The whole mine's burning," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Your home is gone." "We'll build another one. There are plenty of mines in these mountains." He started walking toward me, his claws gleaming in the moonlight. "But first, we need to finish our business. You've caused us a lot of trouble, Joe. Killed some of our pets, destroyed our home. That kind of behavior needs to be punished." I raised my gun and fired all 6 shots. Every bullet hit him in the chest, spinning him around and knocking him down. But he got back up, the wounds already starting to close. "I told you bullets wouldn't work," he said. "We're not alive, Joe. Not really. We're something else now. Something better." That's when I heard the sirens. Sheriff Martin's voice boomed across the valley through a bullhorn. "This is the sheriff's department. We have the area surrounded." Luther's head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time I saw fear in those black eyes. "How?" he whispered. "The fire," I said. "Forest Service. Probably saw the glow from miles away. They'll be here any minute with trucks and men and more fire than you can handle." Luther looked at me, then at the burning mine entrance, then back at the approaching lights. For a moment I thought he might run, but instead he did something I never expected. He laughed. "You think this ends here, Joe? You think we're the only ones?" There are mines all over these mountains. Mines where men died and were forgotten. Mines where hunger and darkness can change a man into something else. The sirens were getting closer now, and I could see flashlights moving through the trees. "This is just the beginning," Luther said. "We've shown the way. Others will follow. And when they do, Joe Blackwood, we'll remember you." He turned and ran, not toward the woods, but back toward the burning mine. I watched him disappear into the smoke and flames, and I never saw him again. But sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howls through the mountains, I think I can still hear him laughing. The official report called it a mine fire caused by faulty electrical equipment, spontaneous combustion of coal dust, possibly triggered by methane gas. The sheriff's department found Mrs. Henderson's remains in the tunnels, along with what they said were animal bones. Lots of animal bones. They sealed the mine permanently this time. Not just chains and warning signs, but tons of concrete poured into every entrance they could find. The whole complex was declared a hazardous waste site, off limits to everyone except authorized personnel. I never told them what I really saw down there. Who would believe it? Vampires in a coal mine? Miners who'd survived for 30 years by drinking blood? It sounded crazy even to me, and I'd lived through it. But I kept watch. Over the next few months, I made it my business to check every abandoned mine in the county. Most were just holes in the ground, full of water or gas or nothing at all. But a few showed signs of recent activity. Scratches on the walls, strange arrangements of animal bones, the smell of olives, and blood hanging in the air. And twice, just twice, I found evidence that Luther might have been telling the truth. The first was at the old Blackstone mine, about 15 miles north of Kowalski. I found a deer hung up in the tunnels, drained white, with those same 2 puncture wounds. But this one was fresh, maybe a day old. Something was living in those tunnels, something that fed on blood. The second was worse. The Morrison mine, way up in the high country where nobody ever went. I found more than just dead animals there. I found clothes, human clothes, torn and bloody, arranged in a neat pile like an offering. And carved into the tunnel wall in letters 3 feet high was a message. "Thank you, Ranger Blackwood. We learned so much." I sealed that mine myself, unofficially. Dropped a few sticks of dynamite down the main shaft and brought the whole thing down. If there was something living in there, it would have to find a new home. But I know it's not over. Luther was right. There are hundreds of abandoned mines in these mountains, places where men died and were forgotten. Places where hunger and darkness might work their changes on what's left behind. I still do my rounds, checking the sealed entrances, watching for signs. I carry more than a .38 now. I've got a shotgun loaded with incendiary shells, and I know where to find mining explosives if I need them. Fire and dynamite seem to work better than bullets against things that aren't really alive anymore. My official reports never mention vampires or blood-drinking miners. I write about methane leaks and unstable structures and recommend keeping people away from dangerous areas. It's easier that way, safer. But sometimes I get calls from other rangers in other states. Stories about strange things in abandoned mines. Cattle found drained of blood near old mining districts. Spelunkers who go into historical Einsitz and never come back out. I listen to these stories, and I take notes, and I remember Luther Kowalski's promise. That this was just the beginning, that others would follow. And I know that somewhere in the darkness beneath these mountains, things that were once human are waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble into their territory. Things that have learned patience over decades of hunger. Things that know how to hide, how to hunt, how to survive in places where normal people fear to go. The coal industry left behind more than empty holes and poisoned water when it pulled out of these mountains. It left behind something hungry, something that remembers what it was like to be human, but has forgotten what it was like to be humane. I'm 58 years old now, and I've been thinking about retirement. But every time I consider hanging up my badge, I remember those pale faces in the mine, and Luther's voice promising that this was just the beginning. So I stay. I watch. I wait, because somebody has to. And because I know that somewhere in the darkness, they're watching me too, waiting for the day when I get too old or too slow or too careless to stop them from spreading their hunger to new places, new victims. The coal mines made these mountains what they are. The coal mines took men and turned them into something else. And the coal mines aren't done with us yet, not by a long shot. My name is Margaret Thornfield, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, car crashes, heart attacks on the trails. You name it, I've dealt with it. But I was wrong about seeing everything. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. Heavy fog had rolled in overnight, thick as cotton and twice as stubborn. I could barely see my own hands as I drove my ranger truck toward Devil's Backbone, that nasty S-curve everybody warns tourists about. Another accident, dispatch said. Single car, went over the guardrail. Devil's Backbone earned its name honestly. It's a stretch of road that curves like a snake's spine along the ridge, with a 500-foot drop on one side and solid rock wall on the other. No room for mistakes. Over my 11 years, I've pulled 17 bodies out of cars that didn't make those curves. 17 people who won't be going home to their families. I know what that feels like. My daughter Emma died on a mountain road 3 years ago. Different mountain, same story. Wet pavement, sharp curve, moment of inattention. The difference was Emma was 17 and texting her boyfriend instead of watching the road. Sometimes I wonder if knowing that makes it easier or harder. Probably harder. As I parked near the bent guardrail, I could hear something that made my skin crawl. Crying. Not the kind you hear from accident survivors. This was different. Deeper. Like someone had lost everything in the world and couldn't stop mourning it. I grabbed my gear and rappelling rope. The fog was so thick I had to feel my way to the edge of the cliff. My flashlight barely cut through it, showing me twisted metal about 30 feet down, caught on a ledge of granite. "Hello?" I called down. "Can anyone hear me?" The crying stopped. Complete silence except for my heart hammering in my chest. I've done dozens of these rescues. You learn to push down the fear, focus on the job, check for survivors first, secure the scene, call for backup if needed. Standard procedure. But as I lowered myself down the cliff face, something felt wrong. The air was too cold for October, even in the mountains, and there was a smell. Not gasoline or burnt rubber like you'd expect from a crash. Something else. Something old and sad, like flowers left too long on a grave. The car was a blue Honda Civic, license plate from Florida. Probably tourists heading south for the winter. The front end was completely smashed. Windshield spiderwebbed, but not broken through. I swept my flashlight across the interior. Empty. No bodies. No blood on the seats. The airbag had deployed, so someone had been driving when it crashed. But where were they? I checked around the wreck, thinking maybe they'd been thrown clear. Nothing. The doors were still shut tight, windows intact except for some stress cracks. Whoever had been in this car had vanished. That's when I heard the crying again. Closer this time. Right behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam dancing across the fog. "Hello? Are you hurt?" No answer. But I could feel someone watching me. You know that prickly feeling you get between your shoulder blades when someone's staring? It was like that, but worse. Like being watched by something that shouldn't exist. My radio crackled. "Maggie, you got anything down there?" I keyed the mic with shaking fingers. "Yeah, I found the vehicle, but there's no one in it." "What do you mean, no one?" "I mean it's empty, Tom. Completely empty." A pause. "That's not possible. We got a 911 call from that phone number 20 minutes ago. Woman screaming about going over the edge." I stared at the empty car. The engine was still arm. Someone had been driving it recently. But where were they now? Above me, the fog seemed to swirl and thicken, And somewhere in that white wall of mist, something was crying like the world had ended. I'd been a ranger long enough to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, fast. But I had a job to do, and somewhere up in that fog, there might be someone who needed help, even if everything in my bones told me they were already far beyond helping. I hauled myself back up the cliff, muscles burning from the climb. The crying had stopped again, but that cold feeling in the air was getting stronger. My breath came out in white puffs, which was weird because it had been 60 degrees when I left the ranger station. Tom's voice crackled over the radio. "Maggie, I'm sending Jake and the EMT unit. Should be there in 15. "Copy that." I was grateful for backup coming. This whole situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. I walked back to my truck to wait, but something made me look toward the curve where the car must have gone off. The fog was starting to lift a little, and I could see fresh skid marks on the asphalt, long black streaks that ended right at the broken guardrail. But there was something else. Footprints in the damp earth beside the road. Small ones, like a woman's shoes. They led away from the crash site, following the guardrail toward the overlook parking area about 100 yards up the road. I followed them, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt. The footprints were clear in the soft dirt, but they seemed to fade the farther I went, like whoever made them was getting lighter with each step. The overlook was empty except for one car, an old station wagon with Tennessee plates. Probably someone who'd pulled over to wait out the fog. I walked over to check on them. The car was running, headlights on, wipers going back and forth across a windshield beaded with moisture. But when I looked inside, my blood turned to ice water. A family. Mom, Dad, 2 little kids in car seats in the back, all of them staring straight ahead with wide, terrified eyes, not moving, not blinking, not breathing. I yanked on the door handle, locked, pounded on the window. "Hey! Hey!" Nothing. They just sat there like mannequins, eyes wide open, looking at something I couldn't see. I grabbed my baton and smashed the passenger window. Glass showered everywhere as I reached inside to unlock the door. The moment I touched the dad's shoulder, he sucked in a huge breath and started screaming. That broke whatever spell had hold of them. The mom started screaming too, and the kids began crying. The dad's hands were locked on the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white as bone. "It's okay," I shouted over the noise. "I'm a park ranger. You're safe." It took 5 minutes to calm them down enough to talk. The mom, Sarah Mitchell, kept looking around like she expected something to jump out of the fog at any second. "There was a woman," she whispered, "in the road, right in front of our car." "What did she look like?" "Tall, thin, long dark hair hanging down over her face. She was wearing a white dress, but it was torn and dirty." Sarah's voice shook. "She was crying, screaming something at us." The dad, Bill, nodded. I hit the brakes hard as I could. Thought we were going to hit her for sure. But when I looked up, she was gone, Sarah finished. Just gone. But we couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It was like she froze us somehow. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. What was she screaming? Sarah and Bill looked at each other. "Don't go," Sarah said quietly. She kept screaming, don't go," over and over. Just then, Jake's EMT truck rounded the curve, red and blue lights cutting through the fog. I'd never been so happy to see backup in my life. But as Jake parked and got out, something made me turn back toward Devil's Backbone. The fog was thicker again, rolling across the road like a living thing. And somewhere in that white wall, I could hear it, crying, getting closer. "Jake," I called, "get that family out of here, right now." "What? Maggie, what's wrong?" The crying was louder now, and underneath it I could hear something else. A voice, thin and desperate, carried on the wind. "Don't go. Don't go. Please don't go." Jake must have heard it too because his face went pale. "What the hell is that?" The fog swept across the parking area like a wave. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 seconds. Ice started forming on my truck's windshield, and then I saw her, standing at the edge of the fog, right where the road curved toward Devil's Backbone. A woman in a torn white dress, long dark hair hanging over her face. She was so thin she looked like she might blow away in the wind. But when she lifted her head and looked at us, I could see her eyes. They were full of tears and pain and a desperate need that made my chest ache. She opened her mouth and let out a wail that made every window in the parking area crack. The sound went through me like a knife, hitting some deep place I'd kept locked up since Emma died. "Don't go!" she screamed. "Please don't go! The children! My children!" Then the fog swallowed her, and she was gone. Jake was standing frozen beside his truck, staring at the spot where she'd been. The Mitchell family was crying again, clutching each other in their car. And somewhere down the mountain, a car horn started blaring. Long, continuous blasts that meant only one thing: another accident. The horn was coming from the direction of Devil's Backbone. Jake and I ran to our vehicles, leaving the Mitchells with instructions to drive straight to the ranger station and wait for us there. As we raced down the winding road, the fog seemed to follow us. I could see it in my rearview mirror, rolling along behind my truck like it had a mind of its own. The temperature gauge on my dashboard was dropping fast, from 60 degrees to 40, then 30. We found the second accident, at the worst part of the curve. A red pickup truck had slammed head-on into the rock wall. The front end was completely crushed, steam rising from the cracked radiator. But this time, there was someone inside. Jake got there first with his medical kit. I could hear him swearing as he tried to get the driver's door open. It was crumpled like a beer can. "Passenger side," I shouted, running around the truck. That door opened, but barely. I had to put my shoulder into it. The driver was a man in his 50s, conscious but bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His right leg was twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Sir, can you hear me?" Jake was checking his pulse, looking for other injuries. "I saw her," the man whispered. "I saw her in the road." I felt that cold chill again. "Who did you see?" "A woman, in white. She was crying, waving her arms at me. I tried to stop, but..." He winced as Jake checked his leg. "She looked so sad, like she'd lost everything." Jake caught my eye over the injured man's head. We both knew what the other was thinking. This was too much to be coincidence. While Jake worked on stabilizing the driver, I walked back toward the curve. The fog was thicker here, so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. But I could feel her, the same presence I'd felt down by the first wreck. "I know you're there," I said to the fog. "I know you're trying to help, but people are getting hurt." The crying started again, softer this time, sad instead of desperate. Then she stepped out of the mist. Up close, she was even more heartbreaking. Her white dress had once been beautiful, silk with lace at the sleeves and neckline, but now it was torn and stained, like she'd been wandering these mountains for years. Her face was pale as moonlight, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of endless tears. But it was her hands that made me gasp. "Sho." He was holding something against her chest, something small and bundled in a blanket. And when I looked closer, I could see 2 more bundles at her feet. Children. She was holding children. "My babies," she whispered, and her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "My precious babies. I couldn't save them." I took a step closer, and she didn't disappear this time. "What happened to them?" "The ice," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "There was ice on the road. I couldn't stop. We went over the edge, and I couldn't. She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I recognized. The same guilt I carried every day since Emma died. The same what-if questions that never had good answers. "You blame yourself," I said quietly. She nodded. "I should have driven slower. Should have stayed home that day. Should have protected them better." "What's your name?" "Catherine. Catherine Harlow." She shifted the bundle in her arms. "These are my children, Mary, James, and little Sarah. They were so young." Behind me, I could hear Jake calling for a medical helicopter. The injured man needed surgery fast, but I couldn't leave Catherine. Something told me this was important, that understanding her was the key to everything. When did this happen, Catherine? 1923, she whispered. November 15th, 1923. The first big ice storm of the winter. That explained the old-fashioned dress, the formal way she spoke. She'd been wandering these mountains for over 70 years, trying to save other families from the same fate as hers. But the people you're trying to warn, I said gently, they're crashing because they see you. You're scaring them. Her face crumpled. I don't know how to stop. Every time someone drives toward the curve, I see my children again. I see the ice, the skid, the fall. I have to warn them. I have to try to save them. The fog was starting to clear, and I could hear the helicopter approaching. Jake would need my help getting the injured man ready for transport, but Catherine was looking at me like I was her last hope. There has to be another way, I told her. A way to protect people without scaring them into crashing. She shook her head. I've tried everything. I've tried staying away, but I can't. Something pulls me back here. Some need I can't ignore. The helicopter was getting louder. Catherine's form was already starting to fade as the fog lifted. Wait, I called. Don't go. We can figure this out together. But she was already dissolving into mist, her last words carried on the wind. Find them. Find my children. Help them rest, and maybe I can too. I stood there staring at empty air, my mind racing. Find her children. But how do you find the graves of people who died in 1923? Jake's shout snapped me back to reality. Maggie, I need help with the stretcher. I ran back to help load the injured man into the helicopter. But as the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the gray sky, I couldn't stop thinking about Catherine Harlow and her 3 children. Somewhere in these mountains were 4 graves that had been forgotten for 70 years. And until someone remembered them, until someone helped them find peace, Catherine would keep trying to save lives in the only way she knew how, even if it meant causing the very accidents she was trying to prevent. 3 days later, I was in the County Historical Society building, digging through dusty records from the 1920s. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had been helpful but skeptical when I told her I was researching old accident reports for park safety purposes. I didn't mention the crying woman in white. Here we go, Mrs. Patterson said, setting a heavy ledger on the table. November 1923. Nasty winter that year, 3 major storms before Christmas. I flipped through pages of careful handwriting, looking for any mention of the Harlow family. And there it was, dated November 16th, 1923. Family of 4 perished yesterday evening when a automobile went over Devil's Backbone during ice storm. Catherine Harlow, 28, and her children Mary, 8, James, 6, and Sarah, 3, were traveling to Asheville to visit relatives when their vehicle skidded on ice and broke through the guardrail. Bodies recovered this morning by volunteer rescue team. Husband Robert Harlow away on business in Richmond. Services pending. My hands were shaking as I read. Catherine had been only 6 years older than I was now when she died. Her children were just babies. Mrs. Patterson, I called. Do you know where the Harlows were buried? She adjusted her glasses and peered at the record. Oh my, that's a sad story. I remember my grandmother talking about it. The husband was so grief-stricken he couldn't bear a funeral. Just had them buried quickly and left town. Nobody knows where they ended up. There has to be a record somewhere. Well, there's the old St. Mary's Cemetery up on Hickory Ridge. That's where most folks were buried back then. But it's been abandoned for decades. Half the headstones are broken or grown over. I got directions to the cemetery and spent the rest of the afternoon driving mountain roads I'd never seen before. St. Mary's was tucked into a hollow between 2 ridges, surrounded by oak trees that had grown huge in the decades since anyone cared for the graves. The cemetery was in bad shape. Broken headstones, weeds everywhere, old graves marked only by sunken spots in the earth. I walked through the rows, pushing aside kudzu vines and brambles, looking for any sign of the Harlow family. I was about to give up when I found them. 4 small headstones in the back corner, so covered with moss and dirt I almost missed them. When I cleared away the growth, I could make out the carved names. Catherine Harlow, beloved wife and mother. Mary Harlow, age 8. James Harlow, age 6. Sarah Harlow, age 3. The dates confirmed it. They'd all died on November 15th, 1923. But something was wrong. The graves were empty. Not dug up exactly, but the ground over them was hollow, like nothing had ever been buried here at all. I was kneeling beside Catherine's headstone when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in 5 seconds. Frost appeared on the grass around me, and the air filled with that familiar smell of old flowers and grief. You found us. I turned around slowly. Catherine was standing at the edge of the cemetery, still holding her children. But something was different. She looked more solid, more real than before. The graves are empty, I said. She nodded sadly. Robert couldn't bear to bury us. He had the stones made, held a service for the town. But our bodies are still down there, in the car at the bottom of the ravine. We never got the rest we deserved. That's why you can't leave the mountain. The children don't understand. They think we're still driving to Asheville to see their grandparents. They keep asking when we'll get there. Her voice broke. I can't tell them we'll never get there. I can't tell them they're dead. Behind her, I could see them now. 3 small shapes in the mist, playing some ghostly game of tag between the headstones. They looked so normal, so alive, except for the pale light that seemed to shine through them. What do you need me to do? Help them understand. Help them let go. They trust you. You have the same sadness we do. You know what it means to lose a child. I felt that familiar ache in my chest. Emma's face flashed in my mind. Not the broken, lifeless face I'd seen at the hospital, but the bright, laughing girl who used to help me identify birds on our hiking trips. How can I help them understand something I don't understand myself? Catherine walked closer, and I could see the compassion in her ghostly eyes. You understand love. You understand sacrifice. You understand that sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do. A sound made us both turn. Car headlights were coming up the mountain road, heading to our Devil's Backbone. It was past midnight now. Who would be driving that dangerous curve at this hour? Catherine's form wavered with panic. I have to warn them. I have to... No, I said, firmly. Not this time. This time, we do it different. I started running toward the road, Catherine floating beside me. We reached Devil's Backbone just as a car rounded the upper curve, a beat-up sedan with college stickers on the back window. Probably students heading home from a late party. The fog was rolling in again, and ice was forming on the asphalt. The same conditions that had killed Catherine and her children 70 years ago. Let me try, I told Catherine. Trust me. I stepped into the road, but not like a ghost in a horror story, like a park ranger doing her job. I had my flashlight, my reflective vest, my official credentials. I was someone drivers would trust, not fear. The car slowed when the headlights hit me. I walked to the driver's window as it rolled down, revealing a young man who looked barely old enough to drink. Evening, I said calmly. I'm Ranger Thornfield. We've got some dangerous ice forming on the road ahead. I'm going to need you to turn around and find a different route. The kid looked annoyed, but not scared. Is the road closed? It's about to be. Safety precaution. I pointed to the fog and ice forming on the pavement. This curve has claimed too many lives already. He nodded and carefully turned his car around. As he drove away safely, I felt Catherine's presence beside me. It worked, she whispered, wonder in her voice. You saved them without scaring them. Because I'm alive, I said. I can do things you can't. But Catherine, I can't be here every night for the rest of my life. Your children need to understand they're gone. They need to move on. She was quiet for a long moment. Will you help me tell them? I nodded. But first, we need to get your bodies properly buried. All of you deserve that peace. It took 2 weeks to organize the recovery operation. I had to pull strings with the county sheriff, the state police, and the Park Service. But when I explained that a 1923 accident had never been properly investigated and that the victims deserved a decent burial, people listened. The dive team found Catherine's car exactly where she said it would be, wedged in a narrow crevice about 80 feet down from Devil's Backbone. After 70 years underwater, there wasn't much left but bones and rusted metal. But it was enough. Catherine and her children got the funeral they should have had in 1923. A simple service at St. Mary's Cemetery with a handful of locals who remembered the old stories. Robert Harlow was long dead, but we found some distant cousins in Virginia who came to pay their respects. I was the only one who could see Catherine and the children at their own funeral. They stood slightly apart from the living mourners, finally understanding what had happened to them. The children looked confused at first, but Catherine knelt down and spoke to them gently, explaining in words they could understand. When the last prayer was said and the dirt was thrown over the caskets, something shifted in the air. The children began to glow with soft, warm light, not the cold, desperate light of ghosts, but something peaceful and welcoming. One by one, they kissed their mother goodbye and walked into that light. Mary first, then James, then little Sarah. They looked back once and waved, not sad, but excited, like they were going on an adventure. Catherine watched them go with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. "Are you going with them?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not yet. I have something else to do first." "What?" She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it wasn't a sad smile. "Help you save lives the right way, the way we should have been doing all along." That was 3 months ago. Devil's Backbone is still dangerous. Ice forms, fog rolls, and people drive too fast on unfamiliar mountain roads, but the accidents have stopped. Now, when conditions get bad, drivers report seeing a park ranger at the curve, directing traffic and warning about hazards. They describe her as professional, helpful, and completely normal. Nothing scary or supernatural about her at all. Except I'm always accounted for when these sightings happen. I'm either at the ranger station or on patrol somewhere else entirely. Catherine found her purpose. She's still protecting travelers on Devil's Backbone, but now she does it as a helper instead of a harbinger of doom. She appears as what people need to see, a figure of authority they'll trust instead of a terrifying specter they'll panic at. I still see her sometimes, usually on foggy nights when the conditions are worst. She nods at me like a colleague, professional respect between two women who understand the weight of protecting others. I never told anyone else about Catherine Harlow and her children. Who would believe it? But every time I drive past that curve, I think about love that transcends death, about guilt that can trap us in endless circles of pain, and about the peace that comes from finally letting go. Emma would be 20 now if she'd lived, old enough to understand that her death wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have saved her no matter how much I wanted to. Catherine taught me that. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is forgive yourself and find a way to help others instead of drowning in what-ifs. Devil's Backbone got its name from all the lives it claimed over the years. But now it's protected by two guardians, one living, one dead, both driven by love and loss and the determination to keep other families from experiencing the same heartbreak we did. The mountain roads are still dangerous. Ice still forms, fog still rolls in, and people still make mistakes. But now, when tragedy threatens, there are two park rangers watching over Devil's Backbone, one who can fill out incident reports and call for backup, and one who can appear wherever she's needed most for as long as travelers need protection from the darkness that lurks on these ancient mountain curves. Some nights, when the wind is right, you can still hear crying in the fog. But it's different now, not desperate or haunted, but peaceful, like a lullaby sung to help weary travelers find their way safely home. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, but everyone calls me Ellie. I've been a park ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, snakes, lost hikers, cave-ins, you name it, I've dealt with it. But what happened at Kettle Creek Hollow in October 1978 changed everything I thought I knew about this place. I grew up here in West Virginia, raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a mine collapse when I was 8. Grandma Whitmore was full of old stories about these mountains. She'd sit on the porch after dinner, rocking in her chair, telling me about spirits in the hollows and children who never left the old mining tunnels. "Stay away from Kettle Creek," she'd always say. "The children there ain't done playing yet." I never believed those stories. Not until October 28, 1978. It was an unusually cold morning when the call came in. The leaves had already turned, painting the mountainsides in reds and golds. But there was something wrong with the air that day. Too still. Too quiet. Even the birds seemed nervous. "Ellie, we got a code yellow up at Kettle Creek," dispatch crackled through my radio. Family of 5 didn't come back from their camping trip. Cars still in the parking area. The Hendersons, that was their name. Mom, Dad, and 3 kids aged 6, 8, and 10. They'd come down from Pittsburgh for a weekend of what they called safe adventure. The kind city folks do, thinking the mountains are like a theme park. I drove my truck up the winding road to Kettle Creek, passing the old mining ruins that dotted the landscape like broken teeth. The hollow stretched about 12 miles through a narrow valley, with elevation dropping 800 feet from the ridge to the creek bed. It was beautiful country, but it had a history. Back in the 1880s, the Whitmore Coal Company, no relation to me, despite the name, had tunnels running all through these hills. In 1887, there was an accident. 23 children died when the main tunnel collapsed. The official report said it was a gas explosion, but Grandma always claimed the owner dynamited the tunnel himself to hide safety violations. The children were trapped inside, and their bodies were never recovered. When I got to the parking area, I found their blue station wagon sitting with all 4 doors wide open. A picnic was still laid out on the table, sandwiches that should have been eaten hours ago, juice boxes still cold to the touch. The family's camping gear was scattered around like they'd left in a hurry. "Henderson family," I called out. My voice echoed off the hollow walls, but no answer came back, not even an echo. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. In 16 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard silence like that. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no wind through the leaves. Even the creek seemed to be running quieter than usual. I checked my equipment: Motorola radio, carbide helmet lamp, gas detector for the old mine shafts. Standard procedure for a search in this area. The Henderson kids were young, and kids love exploring old tunnels. It wouldn't be the first time I'd pulled curious children out of dangerous mine shafts. The temperature dropped as I walked toward the main trail. My breath started steaming, even though it had been warm just 20 minutes before. I checked my watch, 2:30 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but the hollow felt darker somehow, like the shadows were thicker than they should be. I followed the marked trail that led to the safe mining exhibits, old equipment displays, and a partially restored tunnel entrance that families could walk through. It was about a quarter mile from the parking area, an easy hike for kids. But when I got there, I found something that made my stomach drop. Small handprints were pressed into the clay around the tunnel entrance. Too many handprints, way too many for just 3 children, and they glowed faintly in the shadows, like foxfire on rotting wood. I knelt down to examine the handprints more closely. My hands were shaking as I held up my flashlight. The prints were small, child-sized, but there had to be at least 20 of them pressed into the wet clay around the tunnel mouth. Some looked fresh, but others seemed older, like they'd been there for weeks. "Hello?" I called into the tunnel. "Henderson family, are you in there?" My voice disappeared into the darkness, swallowed up like the mountain had eaten it. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Children's laughter, echoing from deep inside the tunnel. "Thank God," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "Kids, come toward my voice. Your parents are worried sick." But the laughter continued, and something about it wasn't right. It was too far away, and it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. The tunnel system here was supposed to be sealed off beyond the first 50 feet. I radioed back to dispatch. "This is Whitmore. Found evidence the missing family entered the old mine system. Going in for extraction. Copy that, Ellie. Want me to send Jake Morrison as backup? Jake was my regular partner, a good man who knew these tunnels almost as well as I did. Yeah, have him meet me here, but I'm going in now. These kids have been missing too long. I adjusted my helmet lamp and stepped into the tunnel. The air inside was cold and damp, with that metallic smell old mines get. My gas detector was quiet. No dangerous fumes, at least not yet. The tunnel stretched ahead of me, much longer than it should have been. According to our maps, this section was only supposed to go back 50 feet before hitting a concrete wall. But I'd already walked twice that distance, and I could see the tunnel continuing into the darkness ahead. The children's laughter echoed again. Claw. Ozer this time. But now I could hear something else. Singing. A child's voice singing Ring Around the Rosie, but the words were wrong somehow. Older. Ring around the mountain, pocket full of coal dust. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. I followed the sound deeper into the tunnel. My footsteps echoed strangely, like there were more feet walking than just mine. The walls here were different too. Rougher, older. This wasn't the restored tourist section anymore. Kids, I'm a park ranger, I called out. I'm here to help you. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Small footsteps coming toward me from the darkness ahead. A little girl stepped into the circle of my flashlight beam. She was maybe 8 years old, wearing an old-fashioned dress that might have been white once but was now gray with coal dust. Her hair was pulled back in braids and her face was smudged with dirt. But her eyes were too bright, like stars. Are you here to play with us? She asked. Her voice had a strange echo to it, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I'm here to help you get out, honey. What's your name? Are you with the Henderson family? The little girl tilted her head. Henderson? Oh, the new children. They're playing with us now. Would you like to see? She turned and walked back into the darkness. Against every instinct I had, I followed her. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber I'd never seen before. My flashlight beam swept across the space, and I saw them. Children everywhere. Dozens of children, playing in the shadows. Some were jumping rope with what looked like old mining cable. Others were playing marbles with chunks of coal. And in the center of the chamber, 5 figures sat in a circle. The Henderson family. Mr. Henderson! I rushed toward them. Ma'am, are you all right? But as I got close, I realized something was horribly wrong. The parents were sitting perfectly still, their eyes wide and staring at nothing. They were breathing, but they didn't respond when I shook them. And the 3 Henderson children were playing patty cake with children in old-fashioned clothes. Coal-stained faces, bright, bright eyes. They're playing the memory game, said the little girl who had led me here. If they remember all the games, they get to stay forever. Stay forever? What do you mean? More children emerged from the shadows of the chamber, all of them wearing clothes from another time. All of them with that strange starlight glow in their eyes. We've been waiting so long for new playmates, said a boy who couldn't have been older than 10. The mountain gets lonely when there's no one to play with. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, but it wasn't there anymore. The chamber stretched in all directions, full of playing children and shadows that moved wrong. My radio crackled with static. Ellie, do you copy? I grabbed the radio. Jake, I'm in the mine system, but something's wrong. The tunnels aren't where they should be, and there are children here, but they're not. The static changed and Jake's voice came through again, but it sounded different. Younger. Ellie, come play with us. We're having so much fun. That's not Jake, I whispered, staring at the radio in my hand. The static continued, mixed with what sounded like children whispering. The little girl in the gray dress stepped closer. Your friend is playing hide-and-seek with us. He's very good at hiding. Where is he? Where's Jake? He's learning the rules, said another child, a boy with suspenders and coal-black fingernails. Just like the new family, just like you will. I looked back at the Hendersons. The parents still sat frozen, staring at nothing. But the children were moving now, clapping their hands in rhythm with the ghostly children around them. Their eyes were starting to change, growing brighter. "Let them go," I said, too, trying to keep my voice steady. "They don't belong here." "Nobody belongs anywhere," the little girl said sadly. "That's why we make families. That's why we play games. Forever and ever." The chamber around us seemed to pulse, growing larger and then smaller, like we were inside something breathing. More tunnels opened in the walls, tunnels that definitely weren't on any map. Children poured out of them, dozens and dozens of children from different times. Some wore clothes from the 1800s, others from the early 1900s, but they all had the same bright eyes and coal-stained faces. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since the mountain fell," said the boy with suspenders. "Since the grown-ups made the loud noise and the ceiling came down. But we kept playing. We always keep playing." The 1887 collapse. These were the children who died in the mine disaster, but that was almost 100 years ago. "My name is Mary Catherine," the little girl said. "I was 9 when I came to play. That was a long time ago. But time is different when you're playing games." One of the Henderson children, the youngest, looked up at me. Her eyes were definitely brighter now, like starlight was growing behind them. "Come play Ring Around the Mountain with us, Miss Ranger Lady. It's fun. Sweetie, I need to get you out of here. Your parents are worried." But even as I said it, I could see it was too late for them. The Henderson children were changing, becoming like the others, and their parents sat there like empty shells. "Adults don't play good games," Mary Catherine explained. "They just sit and watch. But they make good watchers. And sometimes they bring us new children." My radio crackled again. This time it was definitely Jake's voice, but still wrong somehow. "Ellie, the games are wonderful. You should see them all. Red light, green light, and hide and seek and jump rope. We can lay forever." "Jake, where are you?" "Everywhere," came his voice through the static. "The tunnels go everywhere, Ellie, under the whole mountain. There are so many places to play." I had to think. These children, these spirits, or whatever they were, had been trapped here for nearly a century. They'd collected other children over the years, making them part of their eternal game. And now they wanted me. But why me? Why not just turn me into a watcher, like the Henderson parents? Mary Catherine seemed to read my thoughts. "You know about teaching children. We saw it in your mind when you came in. We need someone to teach us new games." She was right. Part of my job was backcountry education, teaching kids about forest safety and mountain skills. Somehow, they'd sensed that. "I'll teach you new games," I said carefully. "But first, let the Henderson family go. Let them go home." The children looked at each other, whispering in voices like wind through dry leaves. "One game," Mary Catherine said finally. "If you win, they go home. If we win, you stay and teach us forever." "What game?" "Hide and seek," said the boy with suspenders. "But mountain rules. If you can hide from us until sunrise, they go free. If we find you, you stay." I looked around the chamber. There had to be at least 40 ghost children here, and they knew these tunnels better than anyone alive. But it was the only chance the Hendersons had. "Deal," I said. The moment I spoke, the children clapped their hands together and the sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. The walls began to change, tunnels opening and closing, the space reshaping itself. "Count to 100, Mary Catherine called out, her voice already fading as the chamber dissolved around me. "Then we come looking." I found myself standing in a narrow tunnel I didn't recognize, holding my failing flashlight. In the distance, I could hear children's voices counting. 1, 2, 3. I ran. The tunnels were a maze that changed as I moved through them. Passages that led upward suddenly dropped down. Routes that should have connected to the main chamber opened onto empty shafts that dropped into darkness. My flashlight beam swept back and forth, showing me walls that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. 37, 38, 39. The counting echoed from every direction. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes like dozens, all speaking together. I tried to use my compass, but the needle spun wildly. My watch had stopped at 3:17. I needed to think like a ranger, not like a victim. These children had been trapped here for almost a century, but they were still children. They played games. They followed rules, and every game had weaknesses. 62, 63, 64. I found what looked like a ventilation shaft leading upward. The walls were rough stone, carved by hand. If I could get to the surface, maybe I could break whatever was holding this place together. But as I started climbing, the shaft began to narrow. Soon I was stuck, barely able to breathe. From below, I heard giggling. "That's cheating, Miss Ranger Lady. The game is in the mountain, not on top of it." The shaft widened again, and I slid back down to the tunnel floor. My knees were scraped and my hands were bleeding, but I was running out of options. 98, 99, 100. Ready or not, here we come. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the tunnel walls. In the distance, I could hear footsteps. Dozens of small feet moving through the tunnels with impossible speed. I ran again, choosing passages at random. But every tunnel seemed to lead me in circles. I'd passed the same rock formation, the same timber support, the same strange, glowing handprints on the walls. Then I heard Jake's voice, closer now. "Ellie, I found a wonderful playroom. Come see." I followed the sound, against my better judgment. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first. Jake sat in the center, cross-legged like a child. His ranger uniform was covered in coal dust, and his eyes were bright as stars. "Jake, what have they done to you?" He looked up and smiled, but it wasn't his smile anymore. "They taught me games I never knew. Want to learn? We could play together forever." "Fight it, Jake. You're stronger than this." "Why would I fight it? I haven't been this happy since I was 8 years old." He stood up, moving with a child's awkward energy. "They showed me how to be young again, Ellie. Really young." Behind him, children stepped out of the shadows. More than before. Many more. "Time's running out," Mary Catherine called from somewhere in the darkness. "Sunrise is still hours away. You can't hide from all of us." She was right. There were too many of them, and they knew every inch of this place. But something she'd said earlier was nagging at me, about time being different when you're playing games. "Mary Catherine," I called out, "how long have you really been here?" Her voice came from right behind me. "Since the mountain fell." I spun around, but she wasn't there. "That was 91 years ago," I said to the empty air. "You've been playing for 91 years. "Time is different here," her voice echoed from the walls. "We play, and the mountain keeps us safe." But I was starting to understand. The children weren't just trapped here, they were holding themselves here. The games, the eternal play, the refusal to grow up or move on. They were afraid of something worse than being lost. "What are you afraid of?" I asked. The footsteps stopped. The whole mountain seemed to go quiet. "We're not afraid." Mary Catherine's voice was smaller now, more uncertain. "We're playing. For 91 years? The same games? Don't you ever want something different?" "Different is scary," said the boy with suspenders, his voice coming from a tunnel to my left. "Different means growing up. Growing up, Mia, instead of going away." Now I understood. These children had died in terror and trauma, and they'd created this place as a refuge. But refuge had become a prison, and games had become compulsion. "Mary Catherine, what if I taught you the most important game of all?" "What game?" Her voice was curious now, closer. "The growing up game. The game where you learn that it's okay to stop playing sometimes." The temperature in the tunnel rose slightly. Frost began melting from the walls. "We don't know that game," she admitted. "I could teach you. But you have to let the Henderson family go first. That's the first rule of growing up. You don't keep people who don't want to stay." Silence stretched through the tunnels. Then, slowly, footsteps approached from multiple directions. The ghost children stepped into the circle of my flashlight beam, dozens of them, all looking younger and more uncertain than before. "If we play the growing up game," Mary Catherine asked, "do we have to stop being friends?" "No, sweetheart, but you have to stop being afraid." The children looked at each other, whispering in their wind-voice language. Finally, Mary Catherine nodded. "Okay, we'll try your game, but if we don't like it, you have to stay and play ours forever." The chamber around us began to change again, walls flowing like water. When everything settled, we were back in the main cavern. The Henderson family sat exactly where I'd left them, but now their eyes were normal again. Confused and terrified, but normal. Jake was there too, shaking his head like he was waking up from a dream. "Ellie? What? Where are we?" "It's okay, Jake. Help me get the family out." As we guided the confused Hendersons toward what I hoped was the exit, Mary Catherine walked beside me. "How do you play the growing up game?" she asked. "First," I said, "you have to say goodbye." The tunnel leading out was the hardest walk of my life. With each step, the walls seemed to press in closer, like the mountain itself was reluctant to let us go. The Henderson family stumbled along behind me, their eyes slowly clearing from whatever spell had held them. Jake supported the youngest Henderson girl, his own confusion evident in every step. Behind us, invisible but present, the ghost children followed. "I don't understand the goodbye part," Mary Catherine's voice whispered near my ear. "Goodbye doesn't mean you disappear," I explained quietly so the others couldn't hear. "It means you stop being afraid of what comes next." "But what if what comes next is bad?" I thought about my parents, buried in a mine collapse when I was 8. I thought about all the children who died in these mountains over the decades, lost to accidents and tragedies that shouldn't have happened. "What if it's good?" I said finally. The tunnel ahead began to brighten, not with electric light, but with the gray light of early dawn. I checked my watch. It had started working again and read 6:23 a.m. We'd been underground all night. "The growing up game is about trust," I continued. "Trusting that it's okay to stop playing the same game forever." As we reached the tunnel entrance, I felt resistance like walking through water. The mountain didn't want to let us go. But then Mary Catherine's voice came one more time. "Okay, we trust you." The resistance disappeared. We stumbled out of the tunnel into the cold morning air, and I had never been so happy to see gray sky in my life. The Henderson family was confused and scared, but they were alive and unharmed. Jake was shaking his head, trying to piece together what had happened to him. "I remember playing," he said quietly. "It was like being 8 years old again, but wrong somehow." "It's over now," I told him. But as we walked back to the parking area, I heard one last sound from the tunnel behind us. Children's laughter, but different this time, lighter, and then, slowly fading, the sound of small voices saying goodbye. We never talked about what had really happened in those tunnels. The official report said the Henderson family had gotten lost in an unmapped section of the mine system, and that Jake and I had found them suffering from hypothermia and mild hallucinations from bad air. Case closed. But a week later, there was a rock slide that sealed the main tunnel entrance completely. The state declared the area too unstable for visitors and closed Kettle Creek Hollow to the public permanently. I transferred to a different section of the forest a month later. Couldn't handle hearing children's voices in the wind anymore, even normal children playing in normal places. Sometimes, though, when the weather's right and the fog rolls through the hollows, other rangers report hearing children's laughter from the sealed section of Kettle Creek. But it's different now. Not desperate or trapped, but free. Mary Catherine and the others learned the growing up game after all. They learned that some games end, and that's okay. They learned that saying goodbye doesn't mean saying goodbye forever. And sometimes, late at night when I'm walking the mountain paths, I hear them playing new games. Games about flying and sunshine and all the places children go when they're finally ready to stop being afraid. The hollow children of Kettle Creek don't need to keep anyone anymore. They're not hollow anymore either. They're just children, playing the way children should, free and unafraid, and growing up when they're ready. But I still tell new rangers to stay away from sealed mines and to listen carefully when children are playing where children shouldn't be. Because some games are more dangerous than others, and some players have been playing alone for far too long. If you hear children's laughter echoing from dark places, remember what I learned. Sometimes the most important game you can teach is how to say goodbye.